Send me your 14th shooter. I'll watch him die just like the other 13. He screamed those words into the radio, then hurled the device against the stone wall so hard it cracked, laughing as the countdown timer flashed red behind him. 4,000 meters away inside a silent American command tent, 13 elite snipers stood frozen, their rifles cold, their confidence shattered, watching the clock tick toward zero. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Until one voice, calm and unshaken, cut through the panic, a Navy SEAL nobody had trusted. Nobody had questioned, standing quietly in the back the entire time. She stepped forward. Let me handle it. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end, because what happens next changes everything. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from right now. I read every single one, and I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The desert did not care who died in it. That was the first thing Senior Chief Daniel Mercer had learned in 22 years of service, and it was the thought sitting heaviest on his chest as he stared at the monitor in front of him. 4,000 meters. The number glowed on the screen like an accusation. Behind him, 13 men who had once been called the finest long-range shooters in the United States military stood in various states of exhaustion, frustration, and something darker. Something that looked a lot like shame. Talk to me, Reynolds, Mercer said without turning around. How much time do we have left? Dr. Noah Reynolds didn't look up from his laptop. His fingers were shaking slightly, though he tried to hide it. 12 minutes, he said. Maybe less. Mercer closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then he opened them again because a commander did not get the luxury of more than 1 second. 12 minutes, he repeated loud enough for the whole tent to hear. 12 minutes before that device goes active and we lose every asset in a 6-mile radius. Does anyone in this tent want to explain to me how 13 of the best shooters this country has ever trained cannot put one round on one target? Nobody answered. Because nobody had an answer, Sergeant Ryan Mitchell stood near the front. His rifle still warm in his hands, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. He had taken the second to last shot. He had been closer than anyone. 11 inches. 11 inches off at 4,000 meters after accounting for spin drift. Coriolis effect, humidity elevation, everything a man could calculate with his mind and his instruments. 11 inches might as well have been a mile. It's not us, Mitchell finally said, his voice low. It's this place. The air out there isn't behaving like it should. I've never seen thermals shift that fast. I don't care what the air is doing, Mercer snapped. I care about that device going active in 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Reynolds flinched at the update. 11:40. The radio on the table crackled to life. Every head in that tent turned toward it like it was a living thing. Still there, gentlemen. The voice was calm, amused, almost bored. Mercer's hand hovered over the radio, but he didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. The man on the other end wasn't looking for a conversation. He was looking for an audience. I count 13 attempts, the voice continued. 13. I was starting to think you'd stop trying. Mitchell's hands curled into fists. Let me go again, he said. Give me one more shot. You already had your shot, Mercer said. Then give someone else a chance to actually hit something. The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind them near the equipment crates, a woman nobody had paid much attention. All afternoon, shifted her weight slightly. She said nothing. She had said nothing for the last 4 hours. But her eyes had not left the horizon once. Her name, according to the roster nobody had bothered to read closely, was Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Carter. Nobody knew why she was there. Nobody had asked. That was about to change. 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Corporal Danny Osei, the 12th shooter to attempt the impossible shot, was still sitting on an ammunition crate with his head in his hands. He hadn't spoken since his round had gone wide. Wider than anyone expected. A shooter with his record didn't miss by that much, not normally. I had it, he kept muttering. I had the wind. I had the drop. I had everything. Osei. Mercer's voice softened just slightly. Nobody's blaming you. I'm blaming me, Osei said, finally lifting his head. His eyes were red. Do you understand what's on that compound, sir? Do you understand what happens if that thing goes live? Nobody answered him because everybody understood exactly what happened. Reynolds cleared his throat. The wind pattern out there isn't consistent with anything in the model. I've run it 4 times. 4 times it's told me something different. Then your model is broken, Mitchell said. My model isn't broken. Reynolds shot back, his composure finally cracking. The desert is broken. Something out there is bending every calculation we make. 10 minutes. The radio crackled again. 10 minutes, gentlemen. I do hope you have a 14th candidate because 13 was rather disappointing. Mercer's jaw tightened. He turned toward the line of exhausted shooters, searching each face for something, anything, a flicker of confidence, a last reserve of belief. He found none. All right, he said, and his voice had the particular flatness of a man preparing to accept failure. Reynolds prepped the evacuation order for anyone inside the blast radius. If we can't take the shot, we minimize the damage. Sir, OC started. That's an order, Corporal. Reynolds' hands moved toward the keyboard, and that was the exact moment the quiet voice cut through the tent. Let me handle it. Every single person turned at once. Mercer felt something shift in his chest, though he couldn't have said what. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was something closer to hope, the kind he'd stopped allowing himself to feel a few failed attempts ago. Carter stood near the crates, her posture relaxed in a way that felt almost wrong given the situation. She wasn't holding a weapon. She hadn't touched the equipment all day. Who are you? Mitchell said, more accusation than question. Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Carter, she said simply. United States Navy. I know your name is on the roster, Mercer said. I don't know why you're standing there instead of standing in line with the rest of my shooters. Because I wasn't watching the target, Carter said. I was watching everything else. Mitchell let out a short, humorless laugh. You think this is a joke? No, Carter said, and there was nothing in her voice that suggested she found any part of this amusing. I think 13 extremely qualified people have been solving the wrong problem for the last 3 hours. The tent went silent except for the low hum of equipment and the distant whisper of desert wind against canvas. 9 minutes. You have 9 minutes to make your point, Mercer said. Make it fast. Carter stepped forward and, for the first time, the exhausted shooters actually looked at her. Really looked. She was younger than some of them, older than others. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged in a conversation about impossible marksmanship. And yet something in the stillness of her expression made Mitchell's sarcastic response die in his throat before he could say it. Every shot taken today corrected for wind at ground level, Carter said. Every single one, speed direction gusts, all measured from where the shooter stood to where the target sat. That's how you calculate a shot, Osei said, confused. That's basic ballistics. That's basic ballistics for a normal environment, Carter said. This isn't a normal environment. Reynolds looked up sharply. What are you saying? I'm saying the wind at ground level isn't what's moving your bullets off course, Carter said. It's the wind 200, 300 meters up. The air above the desert floor is heating unevenly because of the stone compound and the surrounding rock formations. That's creating thermal columns, invisible ones, rising and falling at irregular intervals. Mitchell's expression shifted from irritation to something closer to attention. You're saying our bullets are being pushed off course before they even reach halfway. I'm saying that's exactly what's happening, Carter said, and nobody's instruments are built to measure it because nobody expected to need them to. 8 minutes. Mercer felt his pulse tick upward, not from panic this time, from something else. How do you know this, he said. How do you know this? And none of my top analysts figured it out. Carter's eyes flicked briefly toward Reynolds, not unkindly. Because his models are built for wind, she said, not for heat. I spent the last 4 hours watching the way dust moved above the ground. Not on it, above it. There's a rhythm to it. It's subtle, but it's there. A rhythm, Mitchell repeated, skeptical again. You're telling me you can predict invisible air currents by watching dust. I'm telling you I already have, Carter said. 7 minutes 30. The radio crackled once more, and this time the voice sounded almost gleeful. Tick-tock, gentlemen. I'd hate for this to end anticlimactically. Mercer's hand slammed down on the radio, cutting the transmission before the voice could continue. He turned back to Carter, and for a long moment the two of them simply looked at each other. Commander and stranger. Desperation and calm. You think you can make a shot that 13 specialists couldn't, he said. Yes, sir, Carter said. No hesitation, no arrogance either. Just fact. On what basis? On the basis that I wasn't trying to outshoot the desert, Carter said. I was trying to understand it. Mitchell stepped forward, his voice tight. With respect, ma'am, a 4,000-meter shot isn't about understanding. It's about physics, precision, years of muscle memory under pressure. I have 12 years in this exact discipline, and I missed by 11 inches. I know, Carter said. I watched you take it. Your form was flawless. Your drop calculation was flawless. You corrected for spin drift almost perfectly. Then what went wrong? You corrected for the wind you could feel, Carter said, not the wind you couldn't. Mitchell opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Because somewhere underneath his frustration, a small, uncomfortable thought had started to form. What if she was right? What if all of them, all 13 of the best shooters the branch had to offer, had been fighting an enemy they couldn't even see? 6 minutes. Sir, Reynolds said quietly, staring at his screen. I just cross-referenced her theory against the last 3 shot trajectories. The deviation pattern matches. All 3 rounds drifted in the same general direction at almost the same rate despite different shooters using different corrections. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Come again. If the wind at ground level was the only factor, the drift should have varied more between shooters. Reynolds said, his voice picking up speed as the realization hit him. It didn't. All 3 rounds bent the same way, like something consistent was acting on them, something none of us accounted for. The tent fell silent again, but this silence was different. This silence had weight. 5 minutes 40. She's right, Reynolds whispered almost to himself. Oh my God, she's right. Mercer turned to Carter, and something in his posture had changed. The skepticism was still there, but it was buried beneath something more urgent now. If I put you on that rifle, he said slowly, and you're wrong, did we lose our last window? Do you understand that? I understand that, Carter said. If you're wrong, people inside that blast radius do not walk away. I understand that too, sir. Mitchell stepped closer, his voice quieter now, almost pleading. Then tell me why you're so sure. Carter looked at him, and for just a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Not doubt, something closer to memory. Because I've made this shot before, she said. Not this exact distance, not this exact target, but I've made shots where everyone told me the physics didn't work. And every time the physics wasn't the problem, my understanding of the environment was. 5 minutes. Sir, we are running out of time to debate this, Reynolds said, his voice climbing with urgency. Mercer's eyes moved from Carter to Mitchell to Osi to the rest of the exhausted, defeated men standing in that tent. Every single one of them had given everything they had, and every single one of them had failed. Everyone clear the line, Mercer said finally. Carter, you're up. A ripple of disbelief moved through the shooters. Sir, with respect, one of them started. I said clear the line, Mercer barked, and the finality in his voice ended the conversation before it could begin. Carter didn't smile. She didn't nod triumphantly. She simply walked toward the firing position with the same unreadable calm she'd carried all afternoon, like a woman walking towards something she had already seen finished in her mind. 4 minutes 30. Mitchell caught her arm gently as she passed him. Just for a second, just long enough to say something quiet meant only for her. If you're wrong, he said, I need you to know none of us will blame you. We've all missed today. Carter met his eyes. I'm not planning on missing, she said, and then she kept walking. 4 minutes. Reynolds' hands were flying across his keyboard, now pulling every scrap of atmospheric data he could find, trying to give Carter anything that might help. His voice cracked slightly as he called out numbers. Ground wind reading 3.2 meters per second northeast. Elevated thermal activity detected at approximately 210 meters, consistent with your theory. Copy, Carter said, settling into position without any wasted motion. She didn't reach for the scope immediately. She simply knelt there for a moment, eyes closed, breathing slow and deliberate, like she was listening to something none of the rest of them could hear. 3 minutes 40. What is she doing? One of the younger shooters whispered to Mitchell. I don't know, Mitchell admitted. I've never seen anyone prep like this. Osei, still seated on the crate, watched with an expression somewhere between hope and disbelief. She's not even looking at the target yet. She said she wasn't fighting the desert, Mitchell murmured, almost to himself. Maybe she means it. 3 minutes. The radio crackled one final unwelcome time. 3 minutes, gentlemen. I do hope your 14th attempt is more interesting than the last 13. Mercer didn't respond. His eyes were locked on Carter's back, on the absolute stillness of her shoulders, on the way she seemed almost separate from the panic vibrating through the rest of the tent. 2 minutes 40. Carter finally opened her eyes. She reached for the scope. And every single person in that command tent, 13 defeated snipers, one exhausted commander, one terrified analyst, all of them stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Because whatever happened in the next 2 minutes and 40 seconds would decide everything. 2 minutes 20. Carter's voice, when it finally came, was barely above a whisper, steady, certain, the voice of someone who had already made peace with whatever came next. "Give me the wind reading again," she said. "Now, and keep them coming every 10 seconds. Reynolds nearly dropped his laptop in his rush to comply. 3.1 meters per second holding northeast. Thermal activity increasing at elevation. "Copy," Carter said again. Her finger found the edge of the trigger guard resting there, not yet committing. Mitchell, standing several feet behind her, found himself holding his breath without realizing it. He had spent 12 years believing he understood everything there was to understand about long-range precision. In the last 4 minutes, a woman he had never heard of before today had made him question everything. 2 minutes. "Sir," Osei said quietly, not taking his eyes off Carter's still form. "What if she's right?" Mercer didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat had gone tight in a way it hadn't since his very first deployment decades ago, back when the weight of other people's lives had still felt impossibly heavy on his shoulders. It still did. It always would. 1 minute 50. Carter's breathing slowed further, dropping into the rhythm every marksman trained for, but few ever truly mastered under this kind of pressure. In, out, in, out. Each breath measured deliberate, disconnected from the fear pulsing through everyone else in that tent. "Thermal spike detected." Reynolds called out, his voice cracking with tension. "Elevation 215 meters. It's exactly where she said it would be." Carter said nothing. She had already seen it. 1 minute 30. Mitchell took an involuntary step forward, as though some part of him needed to be closer to whatever was about to happen, needed to witness it up close, needed to understand it in a way that watching from a distance would not allow. "Come on," he whispered, so quiet only he could hear it. "Come on." 1 minute. The desert outside had gone eerily still, as if even the wind itself understood the weight of the moment building inside that tent. Carter's fingers settled fully against the trigger. Her eyes narrowed, focused entirely on something only she could see through that scope. 45 seconds. "Holding," Reynolds said, his voice barely above a whisper now. Thermal activity beginning to shift. "I see it," Carter murmured. 30 seconds. Mercer's hand tightened around the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. 20 seconds. Carter's breathing stopped completely, the way it did for every true marksman in the exact instant before the shot, that final fraction of stillness, where the whole world seemed to hold its breath alongside them. 15 seconds. Nobody in that tent moved, nobody breathed. 10 seconds. Carter's lips parted slightly, and the word that came out was so quiet it barely qualified as sound at all. "Now." And in that exact instant, before the tent could process what was about to happen, before Mercer could brace himself, before Mitchell could finish the breath he'd been holding, Carter's entire body went utterly perfectly still. The kind of stillness that only comes in the half second before everything changes forever. 2 hours after the shot, the desert had gone quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. Carter sat alone outside the medical tent, a bottle of water untouched in her hand, staring at nothing in particular. The adrenaline that had carried her through the last 6 hours had finally drained away, leaving behind something heavier. Something that felt a lot like exhaustion, though not the kind sleep could fix. Inside the command tent, Mercer stood over a secure terminal, reading a message that had just come through on the encrypted channel. His expression, which had softened considerably in the aftermath of Carter's shot, hardened again with every line he read. "Sir," Reynolds said carefully, watching him from across the tent, "you've been staring at that screen for 4 minutes straight. Whatever it says, it's not good." Mercer didn't answer right away. He read it a second time, as though the words might change if he looked at them long enough. "Command wants Carter held," he said finally. The tent went still. "Held it," Mitchell repeated, stepping forward. "Held for what?" "Questioning," Mercer said. "They're flagging her file. Says here her clearance history doesn't match standard SEAL deployment records. says the shot she made today has, and I'm quoting directly, statistically impossible accuracy given the environmental data on record. She saved every single one of us, Mitchell said, his voice rising. She saved this entire base. I know what she did, Mercer snapped, then caught himself exhaling slowly. I know exactly what she did, Sergeant. I watched it happen. But somebody up the chain doesn't care about that right now. Somebody up the chain wants to know how a lieutenant commander with a file this thin was standing in my tent in the first place. Reynolds frowned at his screen. Sir, that's strange, though. If her clearance was compromised or if something about her records was wrong, wouldn't that have been flagged before she ever got assigned to this operation? That's exactly the question they're asking, Mercer said grimly. Osei, who had been quietly listening near the tent entrance, finally spoke up. With respect, sir, isn't it possible that somebody just doesn't like being shown up 13 shooters missed? She didn't. Maybe this is less about her file and more about somebody's ego. Mercer didn't answer that. He didn't need to, because a part of him was already wondering the exact same thing. 3 hours after the shot, the compound had been quiet long enough for recovery teams to move in. Drone footage streamed back to the command tent in grainy real time, showing the shattered remains of the stone structure scorched black at the center where the device had been. I want confirmation, Mercer said, watching the feed. I want to see a body. Working on it, sir, Reynolds said, adjusting the drone's camera angle. Give me a minute. The drone drifted lower, weaving through collapsed stone and drifting smoke. For a long moment, nothing appeared except rubble and shadow. Then near what had once been the entrance, the camera caught something. There, Reynolds said, zooming in. A body partially buried beneath fallen stone lay motionless near the blast site. That's him, Mitchell said, exhaling for what felt like the first time in hours. That's the shooter. That's confirmation. Mercer studied the image carefully, something in his expression not quite settling into relief the way everyone else's had. Zoom in on the face, he said. Reynolds complied. The image sharpened, revealing a man in his mid-40s dressed in tactical gear that didn't match any known insurgent group operating in the region. His face was turned slightly away from the camera, half obscured by rubble. Run facial recognition, Mercer said. Already running, Reynolds said. Give it 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds stretched out like hours. Finally, the system returned a result, and Reynolds' face went pale as he read it. Sir, he said slowly, this isn't a match for any known combatant in our database, not regional, not international. This guy doesn't exist in any system we have access to. That's impossible, Mitchell said. Everyone exists in some system. Not this guy, Reynolds said, staring at the screen. Whoever he is, somebody erased him. Completely. Mercer felt a cold, familiar weight settle in his stomach, the particular feeling that came right before a mission revealed itself to be far more complicated than it had first appeared. Reynolds, he said quietly, pull the audio log from the compound radio transmissions. All of it. Every word that man said to us today. On it. 4 hours after the shot, Carter was summoned back into the command tent. She walked in with the same steady composure she'd carried all day, though Mitchell, watching her closely now, could see something different underneath it. A tightness around her eyes. A wariness that hadn't been there before the mission started. You wanted to see me, sir, she said. Mercer gestured toward a chair. Carter didn't sit. I'll stand if it's all the same to you, she said. Mercer studied her for a moment before continuing. I received a message from command a few hours ago. They want you detained for questioning regarding discrepancies in your service file. Carter's expression didn't change, but something in her posture went very slightly rigid. I see, she said. Do you have anything you'd like to tell me before this goes any further? Mercer asked. Because I'd much rather hear it from you than from somebody reading it off a screen at headquarters. Carter was quiet for a long moment. My file is thin because most of what I've done was never meant to be documented, she said finally. I told you that already. That's not an answer to what I'm asking, Mercer said. I'm asking if there's a reason Command suddenly cares about a mission you just used to save every life on this base. Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There might be, she said quietly. Mitchell, standing near the tent entrance, felt his stomach drop. Might be, Mercer repeated. Lieutenant Commander, I don't have the luxury of might be right now. I have a superior officer demanding I hold you for questioning, and I have absolutely no idea why, which means I can't protect you from it even if I wanted to. I understand, Carter said. Do you, Mercer said, his voice sharpening, Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the woman who just saved this entire operation might also be the reason it was ever in danger in the first place. The accusation hit the tent like a physical blow. Mitchell stepped forward instinctively. Sir, that's not fair. She had nothing to do with that device being there. I don't know that, Mercer said. And right now, neither does anybody else in this tent, including her. Carter's eyes flicked toward Mitchell, something almost grateful in the brief glance before returning to Mercer. Sir, she said, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. I understand your position. I understand why Command is asking questions. But I need you to understand something too. Whatever happened out there today, whatever that man was, and whoever erased his identity from every database your analyst has access to, it wasn't random. Mercer's eyes narrowed. Explain. Carter hesitated just for a moment. Reynolds, who had been quietly reviewing the audio log on his laptop throughout the conversation, suddenly went very still. Sir, he said, his voice tight, I think you need to hear this. Mercer turned toward him. Hear what? The audio, Reynolds said, from the compound radio. I've been running it back, cleaning up the static, isolating the voice. There's something in the last transmission before the shot that I missed the first time through. Play it, Mercer said. Reynolds' fingers moved across his keyboard, and a moment later the taunting voice from earlier filled the tent, distorted slightly by compression, but unmistakably clear. Tick-tock, gentlemen. I do hope your 14th attempt is more interesting than the last 13. That's the same transmission we already heard, Mitchell said, confused. Wait for it, Reynolds said. The recording continued, and beneath the man's voice, almost buried under static, another sound became audible. A second voice, quieter, speaking not to the command tent, but to someone else entirely, someone standing beside him inside that compound. Is she here yet? The muffled second voice asked. Tell me she's here. The first voice laughed softly. She's here, he said, though not into the radio. His words meant only for whoever stood beside him. I can feel it. She always shows up eventually. The recording cut off. The tent had gone completely silent. Mitchell was the first to break it. He knew, he said slowly, turning to look at Carter. He knew you'd be there before you ever stepped forward, before any of us even knew your name. Carter's face had gone pale, her composure cracking for the first time since the mission began. Mercer's voice, when it came, was quiet and deadly serious. Lieutenant Commander, I need you to tell me exactly what is going on, right now. Carter closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, something in her had shifted. The calm authority that had carried her through the impossible shot was still there, but underneath it, something raw had surfaced. I don't know who that man was, she said. Not specifically, but I recognize the pattern, the taunting, the confidence that whatever we threw at him, he'd already accounted for it. The way he waited for a 14th shooter instead of just detonating the device the moment 13 had failed. What pattern? Mercer pressed. He wasn't just testing your shooters, Carter said. He was drawing someone out, specifically. And based on what your analyst just played, that someone was me. 5 hours after the shot, the tent had emptied of everyone except Mercer, Mitchell, Reynolds, and Carter. Start from the beginning, Mercer said. All of it. Whatever you've been holding back since you walked onto this base 4 hours before the mission even started. Carter took a slow breath. 3 years ago, she said, I was part of an operation almost identical to this one. Different desert, different country, but the same setup. A hostile actor holed up in a fortified position, an impossible long-range shot required to neutralize a threat before a device went active. You mentioned this before, Mitchell said quietly. You said someone else took the shot that day. Someone you trusted. His name was Ethan Cole, Carter said, and something in her voice cracked just slightly on the name. He was my training partner. My mentor, honestly, though he never liked being called that. He taught me everything I know about reading terrain, reading, weather reading, the small invisible signs most shooters never bother to notice. And he missed, Mercer said. He missed because the device he was aiming to disable had been placed there specifically to lure him into taking that exact shot under those exact conditions because someone wanted him dead, Carter said. Someone who understood exactly how good he was and exactly what it would take to beat him. The tent had gone completely still. You're saying today's mission was the same thing, Mitchell said slowly, the horror dawning on his face. You're saying that man in the compound wasn't just some random operative protecting a weapon? You're saying he built this entire scenario to draw you out. I think Carter said carefully, that whoever designed today's operation knew my history, knew what happened 3 years ago, and knew that if you put an impossible shot in front of enough shooters, eventually someone would call me in to solve it. That's insane, Reynolds said. That would require knowing this operation was going to happen days, maybe weeks in advance. It would require knowing which base you'd be assigned to which unit you'd be attached to, and betting that 13 elite marksmen would fail badly enough that command would eventually turn to you. I know how it sounds, Carter said. It sounds impossible, Mercer said. 3 hours ago, Carter said quietly, so did the idea that a sound wave whispered into a radio would somehow spell out a bigger truth. So did the idea that a face with no matching record in any database on Earth would show up dead in a pile of rubble in the middle of the Arizona desert. Nobody in the tent had a response to that. 6 hours after the shot, Reynolds' system pinged with an alert, and the color drained from his face almost instantly. Sir, he said, his voice unsteady, you need to see this. Mercer crossed the tent quickly. What is it? The heat signature from the drone feed, Reynolds said, pulling up a new window on his screen. I went back through the recorded footage from immediately after the shot. There's a secondary thermal signature I missed the first time through. It's small, barely registers, but it's there. Show me, Mercer said. Reynolds highlighted a faint red dot on the screen moving slowly away from the compound in the minutes immediately following the explosion. That's a person, Mitchell said, leaning closer. That's someone walking away from the blast site. It gets worse, Reynolds said. I cross-referenced the timing. Whoever this is, they left the compound roughly 90 seconds before Carter's shot ever landed, which means either they knew the shot was coming and got out in time, or the man we killed wasn't acting alone, Carter finished quietly. The tent seemed to grow colder despite the desert heat pressing against the canvas walls outside. So the device is neutralized, Mercer said slowly, working through the implications out loud. But whoever built it, whoever planned this entire operation, whoever knew Carter's history well enough to bait her into that firing position is still out there. That would explain why Command flagged her file, Mitchell said, his pieces clicking into place with visible discomfort. They're not accusing her of being compromised. They're worried she's the target of an operation that's still in progress. Reynolds nodded slowly. That actually makes a lot more sense than the alternative. Mercer turned to Carter. Do you have any idea who could be behind this? Anyone from your past who would have both the motive and the resources to design something this elaborate? Carter was quiet for a long moment, her mind clearly working through possibilities she had spent 3 years trying not to think about. There was an investigation after Cole died, she said finally, into how the operation had been compromised, into who had access to the mission details that shouldn't have. It never went anywhere, no conclusive evidence. The file was eventually closed, marked unresolved. Who ran that investigation, Mercer asked. I did, Carter said, unofficially, for almost a year after they closed the official file. And I found one name that kept surfacing, Carter said. A private contractor who'd had brief deniable involvement in logistics for the mission that killed Cole. Someone who disappeared from every official record almost immediately after the investigation began asking questions. A name, Mercer pressed. Carter hesitated. Before she could answer, the radio on the table crackled unexpectedly, cutting through the tension in the tent like a blade. Every head snapped toward it. That frequency is dead, Reynolds said, staring at the equipment in confusion. We shut down that channel after the compound went silent. There's nobody left transmitting on it. The radio crackled again, and this time a voice came through, clear and calm and utterly unmistakable. Hello, Evelyn. Carter went completely rigid. The voice continued, almost gentle in its cruelty. I imagine you're wondering how I'm still talking to you given that you just watched a man die in that compound. I'll spare you the confusion. He was never the point. He was the bait. You, on the other hand, are exactly who I hoped would answer. Who is this? Mercer demanded, snatching up the radio. Identify yourself. A soft, unhurried laugh answered him. Ask her, the voice said. She already knows. Carter's hands had begun to tremble almost imperceptibly, though her face remained a mask of forced control. Cole, the voice continued softer now, almost intimate, sends his regards, or he would if I hadn't been the one who made sure he never came home 3 years ago. The tent exploded into motion. Mitchell lunging toward the equipment as though he could somehow reach through the radio and grab the man on the other end. Reynolds frantically trying to trace the signal. Mercer barking orders nobody could quite process fast enough. But Carter didn't move. She stood perfectly still, staring at the radio, her entire world narrowing down to that one impossible, horrifying voice, the voice of the man who had spent 3 years hiding behind erased records and deniable contracts. The voice of the man who had just confirmed in front of everyone in that tent that he had murdered the person she loved most in the world and had spent the years since building an elaborate trap specifically designed to bring her back into his crosshairs. "I've been waiting a long time for this conversation, Evelyn," the voice said, almost tender in its menace. "Cole was talented, but you were always the one I actually wanted to test." "Who are you?" Carter finally said, her voice shaking with a fury she had clearly been suppressing for 3 long years. "You'll find out soon enough," the voice said, "assuming you're as good as today suggested." The transmission cut off. Silence swallowed the tent whole. Reynolds stared at his screen, his face pale. "Signal's gone. Untraceable. Whoever that was, they're using equipment far beyond anything we should be seeing out here." Mercer slowly lowered the radio, his eyes fixed on Carter, watching the woman who had seemed utterly unshakable just hours earlier, now standing frozen, staring at nothing, the weight of 3 years of grief and unanswered questions crashing down on her all at once. "Carter," Mitchell said, gently stepping toward her, "are you all right?" For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then slowly something hardened behind her eyes, grief transforming into something colder, sharper, more purposeful. "He's still out there," she said quietly, "and now he knows I'm listening." Mercer set the radio down carefully, his jaw tight with the particular tension of a commander who suddenly understood that the mission he thought had ended 6 hours ago was in fact only just beginning. "Command's going to want a full report on this," he said immediately. "Command can wait," Carter said, and there was something in her voice now, something unyielding, that made even Mitchell take a small step back. 3 years I let this go unanswered. 3 years I told myself there was nothing more I could do. She looked up, meeting Mercer's eyes directly. "That's not true anymore." The tent fell silent once again, but this silence carried none of the relief from hours earlier. This silence was charged electric heavy with the understanding that whatever had just begun in that desert command tent was far from finished, and that the woman who had made the impossible shot everyone would remember for years to come had just discovered that the true target of today's mission had never been a device at all. It had been her. 6 hours and 10 minutes after the shot, 2 military police vehicles rolled through the checkpoint at the edge of the forward base. Mercer saw them coming through the tent flap and felt his stomach tighten. "That was fast," he muttered. Reynolds looked up from his laptop. "Sir, Command didn't wait for my report," Mercer said. "They're already here." Carter, still standing near the radio equipment, with her jaw set tight, turned toward the entrance. "Let me guess. They want me in custody before I even get a chance to explain what just happened on that channel." "Probably," Mercer admitted. "Sir, you can't let them take her," Mitchell said, stepping forward. "Not now, not after what we just heard. If that man out there is targeting her, specifically putting her in a transport vehicle with 2 unarmed MPs, is basically handing him exactly what he wants." "I'm aware of that, Sergeant," Mercer said sharply. "I don't need you to explain tactics to me." "Then don't let them take her." "I don't have a choice," Mercer said, and the frustration in his voice was genuine. "I received a direct order from a superior officer. I can request clarification. I can push back, but I can't simply ignore it, not without risking my own command." Carter held up a hand before Mitchell could argue further. "He's right to be cautious," she said quietly. "Let them come." "Carter," Mitchell started. "I've survived worse than an escort to a secure facility," Carter said. "What I haven't survived is 3 years of not knowing who killed Cole. If going through the process gets me closer to an answer, I'll go through the process." Mercer studied her for a long moment, something like respect flickering behind his exhausted eyes. "I'll accompany the transport," finally, "and I'll make sure whoever's waiting on the other end hears every second of that radio transmission before they decide anything." 6 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, 2 military police officers stepped into the tent, their expressions carefully neutral, in the particular way that it suggested they had been briefed to expect resistance. "Lieutenant Commander Carter," the lead officer said, "we need you to come with us." "Understood," Carter said and moved without hesitation. Mitchell watched her go, His hands clenched at his sides, every instinct screaming at him that letting her walk out of that tent was a mistake. But he also understood with the particular clarity that came from years of following orders he didn't always agree with, that arguing further would accomplish nothing except making Mercer's position more difficult. As Carter passed him, she paused just for a second. "Watch the drone footage again," she said quietly, low enough that only he could hear. "The thermal signature Reynolds found. Something about the direction it moved doesn't sit right with me." Then she was gone, flanked by the two MPs walking out into the harsh desert light toward the waiting vehicles. Mitchell turned immediately to Reynolds. "You heard her. Pull the footage back up." Reynolds nodded, already typing. 6 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reynolds isolated the thermal signature again, this time slowing the playback down frame by frame. "There," he said, pointing at the screen. "See that the signature doesn't move in a straight line away from the compound like you'd expect from someone fleeing. It curves, almost like they're circling." "Circling toward what?" Mitchell asked, leaning closer. Reynolds pulled up a satellite overlay, cross-referencing the movement pattern against the surrounding terrain. His face went pale. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, "I think you need to see this." Mercer, who had stepped back into the tent after watching the transport vehicles pull away, crossed over quickly. "What?" "The thermal signature isn't fleeing the blast site," Reynolds said. "It's moving toward this ridgeline about 800 meters northeast of the compound. And based on the elevation and sight line, that ridge has a clear, unobstructed view of." He trailed off, the horror dawning on his face in real time. "Of what?" Mercer pressed. "Of the road leading out of this base," Reynolds finished. "The exact road the transport vehicles just took." The tent went dead silent. "He's not gone," Mitchell said, his voice hollow. "He's positioned. He's been positioned this entire time, waiting to see what we do next." Mercer was already moving, snatching up a radio, his voice cutting through the tent like a blade. "All units. This is Senior Chief Mercer. I need eyes on the transport route immediately. Possible hostile with elevated sightline on the exit road. Repeat, possible ambush position on the exit road." 6 hours and 35 minutes after the shot, the radio in Mercer's hand crackled with a response, and every word that came through hit the tent like a physical blow. "Transport 1, this is Overwatch. We have movement on the ridge. Repeat, we have movement on the ridge 800 meters matching described position." Mercer's blood ran cold. "Transport 1, respond. Do you copy?" Static answered him. "Transport 1, respond immediately." More static. Mitchell's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles went white. Then finally a voice broke through, tense and urgent. "Overwatch, this is Transport 1. We hear you. We're moving. We're moving. Do you have a shooter confirmed on that ridge or not?" "Unconfirmed," Overwatch responded. "Movement detected. No visual on weapon." "Copy. We are not stopping. For anything, repeat. We are not stopping." Mercer exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, though the relief was thin and fragile, nowhere close to real safety. "Reynolds," he snapped, "I want that ridge under drone surveillance right now. I want to know exactly who or what is up there." "On it," Reynolds said, already redirecting the drone feed. 6 hours and 40 minutes after the shot, the drone camera swept across the ridgeline, scanning slowly through drifting heat shimmer and scattered rock formations. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing appeared. Then the camera caught a flash of movement gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "There," Mitchell said, pointing sharply at the screen. "Back it up, right there." Reynolds rewound the footage and slowed it down frame by frame until the image sharpened enough to make out a shape crouched low against the rocks, dressed in tan tactical gear that blended almost perfectly with the terrain. "That's a person," Mercer confirmed grimly. "Confirmed hostile on the ridge." "Do we have anyone close enough to intercept?" Mitchell asked. Reynolds checked his tablet, cross-referencing patrol positions. "Negative. Nearest unit is 12 minutes out. By the time they reach that position, whoever's up there will be long gone." "Then we watch," Mercer said, "and we make sure that transport gets Carter to the secure facility in one piece." The tent fell into tense, watchful silence, every eye locked on the drone feed, every breath held, as the transport vehicles continued down the winding desert road, the shape on the ridge remaining perfectly patiently still, watching, waiting, saying nothing. 6 hours and 55 minutes after the shot, the transport vehicles finally cleared the exit route, disappearing over a rise in the road toward the secure facility roughly 40 minutes away. The shape on the ridge did not follow. Instead, it simply rose unhurried and walked calmly back down the far side of the slope, disappearing from the drone's view entirely. "He let them go," Mitchell said, confusion mixing with relief in his voice. "Why would he let them go if he had a clear shot?" Mercer's jaw tightened as understanding settled over him, cold and unwelcome. "Because he wasn't trying to stop the transport," he said slowly. "He was confirming something." "Confirming what?" Reynolds asked. "That we'd react," Mercer said. "That we'd scramble units, redirect drones, tip our hand on exactly how we respond to a threat. He wasn't there to kill anyone today. He was there to study us." The weight of that realization settled heavily over the tent. "This isn't over," Mitchell said quietly. "This was never going to be over the moment that first shot landed, was it?" Nobody answered him because everybody already understood the answer. 7 hours after the shot at the secure facility, 40 minutes from the forward base, Carter sat alone in a small, windowless interview room, her hands folded on the metal table in front of her, waiting. The door opened, and a man in a dark suit entered, his expression carefully unreadable, a thin manila folder tucked under his arm. "Lieutenant Commander Carter," he said, taking the seat across from her. "My name is Agent Holt. I work with Naval Criminal Investigative Service." "I know who NCIS is," Carter said evenly. "I imagine you do," Holt said, opening the folder and spreading a handful of documents across the table. "I've spent the last several hours reviewing your file. What little exists of it anyway. I have to say, Lieutenant Commander, in 20 years of doing this job, I've rarely seen a record this deliberately incomplete." "That's not an accident," Carter said. "Most of what I've done wasn't meant to be written down." "So you've said apparently to Senior Chief Mercer as well." Holt tapped a finger against one of the documents. "But here's what interests me. 3 years ago, there's a gap in your record. Almost 14 months where your assignments are classified beyond even my clearance level. Right around the time a joint operation resulted in the death of an operator named Ethan Cole." Carter's expression didn't change, though something behind her eyes hardened. "I'm aware of the timeline," she said. "I bet you are," Holt said, "because from what I can piece together, you spent almost a year after his death running an unofficial investigation into his death. An investigation that officially doesn't exist, but that I have reason to believe absolutely happened. Is there a question in here somewhere, Agent Holt?" Holt leaned back, slightly studying her. "Here's my question, Lieutenant Commander. Today, 13 elite marksmen fail an impossible shot. You, a Navy SEAL with an unusually thin, unusually classified file, step forward and make that shot on your first attempt. Shortly after, we discover the target's identity has been completely erased from every database we have access to. And then less than an hour later, a mystery voice comes through on a supposedly dead radio channel and directly threatens you by name referencing Cole's death." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Either you're the unluckiest officer in the United States Navy," he said finally, "or somebody has been building toward this exact moment for a very long time. And I need to understand which one it is before I decide what happens to you next." Carter met his eyes steadily. "It's the second one. Explain." 3 years ago, Carter said, "I believe Cole's death was the result of compromised mission intelligence. I ran my own investigation because the official one went nowhere, closed within weeks, marked unresolved, despite obvious inconsistencies in the operational briefing we'd been given." "What kind of inconsistencies?" "Wind data that didn't match historical patterns for that region," Carter said. "A target location that had been moved twice in the final 48 hours before the mission information that should have triggered a full mission reassessment and didn't. And a private contractor with brief deniable involvement in the mission's logistics who disappeared from every record almost immediately after my questions started making people uncomfortable." Holt's pen had stopped moving across his notepad. "Do you have a name for this contractor?" Carter hesitated, and for just a moment, something like fear flickered across her otherwise composed expression. "Marcus Vane," she said quietly. Holt went very still. "Say that again," he said. "Marcus Vane," Carter repeated. "Why, do you recognize the name?" Holt closed the folder in front of him slowly, his expression shifting into something Carter hadn't seen from him yet. Concern. Genuine, unguarded concern. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice lower now, "Marcus Vane has been under quiet federal investigation for the last 18 months. Weapons trafficking, private military contracting without proper licensing, Suspected involvement in at least 3 unsolved deaths connected to classified operations across 2 continents. Carter's hand still folded on the table tightened slightly. You knew this name before I said it, she said slowly, which means you already suspected he was connected to today. I suspected it, Holt admitted. I didn't have confirmation until you just gave it to me. Then you understand why I need to be part of whatever comes next. Carter said, her voice hardening with sudden intensity. This isn't just an investigation to me. This is the man who murdered someone I loved and then spent 3 years building an elaborate operation specifically designed to draw me back into his sights. I understand that, Holt said carefully, which is exactly why I can't simply hand you a case file and send you out to hunt him down. If half of what you're describing is true, Vane has resources, patience, and a level of planning that suggests he's been preparing this for a very long time. That makes you a liability in the field, not an asset, at least until we understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Carter's jaw tightened. With respect, Agent Holt, I just made a shot today that 13 of your best trained snipers couldn't make. I understand exactly what I'm walking into. I don't doubt your skill, Holt said. I doubt your objectivity. There's a difference, Lieutenant Commander, and it's the difference that gets good operators killed. 7 hours and 30 minutes after the shot back at the forward base, Mercer stood staring at the drone footage frozen on Reynolds' screen, the empty ridgeline where the mystery figure had vanished still glowing faintly in the fading afternoon light. Sir, Mitchell said quietly, standing beside him. What's the play here? We can't just sit on this. I know that, Mercer said. Carter's out there alone walking into an interrogation room while the man who killed her mentor is somewhere out in that desert watching, waiting, planning his next move. We need to be doing something. Mercer turned to face him. What exactly do you propose, Sergeant? I have no authority over NCIS custody. I have no jurisdiction beyond this base, and I have a superior officer who's already made it clear this situation is above my pay grade. Then let's make it not above your pay grade, Mitchell said. Sir, I've served under you for 3 years. I've never once seen you let a chain of command excuse stop you from protecting your people when it mattered. Mercer studied him for a long moment, something conflicted, working behind his tired eyes. You really believe her, he said finally. About all of it, the mentor, the 3-year investigation, the man on the radio. I believe what I heard on that radio, Mitchell said. I believe the thermal signature Reynolds found. I believe that whoever was on that ridge today wasn't there by accident. And I believe that if we don't do something now, we're going to be reading about Carter's death in an incident report a week from now, the same way somebody probably wrote up Cole's. Reynolds, still seated at his terminal, cleared his throat. For what it's worth, sir, I've been quietly pulling everything I can on the erased identity from the compound. It's not much, but I found a fragment, a partial serial number on a piece of equipment recovered from the blast site. Military grade, but not from any inventory we've ever issued. Where does it trace to? Mercer asked. That's the thing, Reynolds said. It traces to a private contracting firm that officially dissolved 4 years ago, except the equipment is dated to manufacture just 8 months ago. Mercer's eyes narrowed. A company that doesn't exist anymore is somehow still producing military-grade equipment. Someone's keeping the paperwork dead while the operation stays very much alive, Reynolds said grimly. 8 hours after the shot, Mercer made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his career. He picked up the secure line, dialed a number he hadn't used in years, and waited through 3 rings before a familiar gravel-voiced woman answered. Colonel Reyes, Mercer said. It's Mercer. I need a favor and I need it fast. Daniel Reyes said, her voice carrying the particular warmth of an old friend mixed with the wariness of someone who knew a favor from Mercer never came without complications. I heard about the shot today. Word travels fast. You want to tell me why you're calling instead of celebrating? Because the mission isn't actually over, Mercer said, and I need someone with real authority to open a proper investigation into a name that just surfaced, Marcus Vane. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Where did you hear that name? Reyes said, her voice suddenly guarded. From the woman who made an impossible shot today and then got threatened by a dead radio channel an hour later, Mercer said. Colonel, I think whatever's happening here is bigger than one compromise operation in the Arizona desert. I think it's been building for years, and I think we're the only ones positioned to stop it before it finishes what it started. Another pause longer this time. Give me 2 hours, Reyes said finally. I'll make some calls. 8 hours and 30 minutes after the shot back in the interrogation room at the secure facility, Holt re-entered with a fresh cup of coffee, sliding it across the table toward Carter without a word. Carter eyed it warily. Is this the part where you tell me you're letting me go? Or the part where you tell me I'm being held indefinitely? Neither yet, Holt said, sitting down heavily. I just got off the phone with someone considerably higher up the chain than me. Seems your senior chief Mercer made a few calls of his own. Carter's eyebrows rose slightly. Mercer did that. Apparently your little demonstration today, Bettini, earned you more loyalty than you realized, Holt said. Colonel Reyes is opening a formal joint task force investigation into Marcus Vane effective immediately. Given your history with this case and given that you're apparently the specific target of whatever Operation Vane is running, there's a proposal on the table. What kind of proposal? You join the task force, Holt said, Austuan. Officially, not as a suspect, not as a liability being managed, as an operator with unique, irreplaceable knowledge of the man we're hunting. Carter's expression remained carefully controlled, but something behind her eyes sharpened with sudden, fierce clarity. There's a condition, isn't there? She said. There's always a condition. Holt nodded slowly. You work with a partner. Someone assigned to monitor you, keep you grounded, make sure your history with Vane doesn't turn this into something personal enough to get you or anyone around you killed. Who? Holt slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Carter looked down at the name typed neatly across the top. Sergeant Ryan Mitchell. For the first time since the entire ordeal had begun, something that might almost have been a smile flickered at the corner of Carter's mouth. He already tried to argue Mercer into breaking me out of here about an hour ago, she said quietly. Something tells me he's not going to object to this assignment. 9 hours after the shot, as the sun finally began to sink below the horizon, painting the desert sky in deep shades of orange and violet, Carter stood outside the secure facility, waiting as a vehicle pulled up carrying Mercer, Mitchell, and Reynolds. Mitchell was the first one out, crossing the distance between them in quick, purposeful strides. You all right? He asked, searching her face for any sign of what the last several hours had cost her. I'm still standing, Carter said, which Mitchell was beginning to understand about as close to an honest emotional admission as Carter ever allowed herself. We're in this together now, Mitchell said. Officially, task force and everything. So I heard, Carter said, glancing past him toward Mercer, who approached more slowly, his expression heavy with the weight of a decision he knew would have consequences far beyond today. I made some calls, Mercer said simply. I wasn't going to sit back and let a good operator get buried under paperwork while the man who tried to kill her walked free in that desert. Carter studied him for a long moment. Thank you, she said quietly, and the sincerity in those two words carried more weight than any lengthy speech could have. Mercer nodded once, then turned his gaze toward the darkening horizon, toward the vast, silent desert that had already claimed one operator he cared about years before he had ever met her, and had very nearly claimed an entire base full of soldiers just hours earlier. Vane's out there somewhere, he said quietly, watching, waiting, believing he's still 3 steps ahead of all of us. Carter's eyes followed his gaze, fixing on that same distant horizon, her expression hardening into something cold and unwavering. Then it's time we stopped playing his game, she said, and started playing our own. Behind them, the last light of the day faded from the sky, leaving the desert rapier. 10 hours after the shot, the task force operations room hummed with a different kind of tension than the one that had gripped the forward base earlier that day. This wasn't panic. This was purpose. Carter stood in front of a wall covered in printouts, photographs, and red string connecting pieces of a puzzle 3 years in the making. Mitchell stood beside her, arms crossed, studying the same wall with the particular intensity of a man trying to catch up on a war he'd only just learned existed. Walk me through it again, he said. From the top, everything you know about Vane. Carter didn't hesitate. She'd waited 3 years to say these words out loud to someone who would actually listen. Marcus Vane isn't military, she said. Not officially. He ran the logistics for a private contracting outfit that did off-the-books work for 3 different agencies, none of whom talked to each other, which meant nobody ever had the full picture of what he actually did. How did you first cross paths with him? Mitchell asked. Cole brought him in, Carter said, and something flickered behind her eyes at the mention of the name. For the operation that killed him, Vane handled the intelligence packet, wind data, terrain analysis, target positioning, everything a sniper needs to trust completely before taking an impossible shot. And the intelligence was wrong. The intelligence was poison, Carter corrected. Deliberately. I spent a year proving it, and the year after that trying to find him, and he simply vanished. No forwarding address, no paper trail, just gone. Reynolds, seated at a nearby terminal, looked up. Until today. Until today, Carter agreed quietly. 10 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, Holt walked into the room carrying a thick folder, his expression grim in a way that immediately put everyone on edge. I pulled everything NCIS has on Vane, he said, dropping the folder onto the table. It's thinner than it should be for someone this dangerous, which tells me he's had help staying hidden. Real help. Government-level help. Someone inside, Mitchell said slowly. That's my working theory, Holt admitted, which means this task force operates on a strict need-to-know basis. 4 people in this room. Nobody else gets briefed on details until I say so. Mercer, standing near the door, folded his arms. That's a dangerous game to play, Agent Holt. If you're right and there's a leak somewhere in the system, keeping this compartmentalized might not be enough to protect it. It's the only option I've got, Holt said, unless someone in this room has a better idea. Nobody did. 10 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reynolds pulled up a new file on the main screen, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. I finally got a hit on that partial serial number, he said. The equipment from the blast site. It traces back through 6 shell companies, but eventually lands on a shipping manifest out of a private airfield in New Mexico. 3 weeks ago. Show me, Carter said, stepping closer. The screen displayed a grainy security photo timestamped showing a cargo plane being loaded under cover of darkness. That's not a commercial operation, Mitchell said, studying the image. That's someone with serious money and serious patience. Vane always had both, Carter said quietly. There's more, Reynolds continued. The airfield logs a flight plan filed for Arizona airspace 2 days before today's mission was even scheduled, which means he knew exactly where and when this operation was happening before command did. Mercer finished, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. That's not a leak. That's someone feeding him our operational timeline in real time. The room went quiet, the weight of that realization settling over everyone. 11 hours after the shot, Holt received a call that made his face go pale in a way none of them had seen before. Say that again, he said into the phone, his voice tight. He listened for a long moment, then slowly lowered the phone. What? Carter said, immediately reading the change in his expression. That's the second body, Holt said. Found 40 minutes ago, 20 miles from here. Throat cut, no ID. No prints on file. Local sheriff's department found him near an abandoned gas station off the highway. Why does that concern us? Mitchell asked. Because he was found with a burner phone, Holt said. And the last outgoing call on that phone was placed to a number that matches the frequency Reynolds traced from this afternoon's radio transmission. Carter's stomach dropped. Vane is cleaning up loose ends. Or sending a message, Holt said grimly. 11 hours and 20 minutes after the shot, the team drove in silence toward the gas station, the desert night pressing close around the headlights, swallowing the road ahead into darkness. Mitchell sat beside Carter in the back seat, watching her carefully. You've gone quiet, he said. I'm thinking, Carter said, about Cole. Carter didn't answer right away. About how every single piece of this feels designed. The compound, the shot, the radio transmission. Now this body, it's like he's building a trail specifically for me to follow. That's not comforting, Mitchell said. No, Carter agreed, it's not. 11 hours and 45 minutes after the shot, they arrived at the scene. Red and blue lights washing across the cracked asphalt of the abandoned gas station. A local sheriff's deputy waved them through the perimeter, and Carter knelt beside the body without hesitation, her trained eyes scanning every detail. He's not local, she said quietly. Look at his boots. Military surplus, but the tread pattern is European manufacture. You can tell that from a glance, the deputy said, half impressed, half unsettled. I've had practice, Carter said, not looking up. Mitchell crouched beside her. What are you seeing that we're not? Carter's eyes narrowed at something near the body's hand, half buried in the dust. There, she said, pointing. Reynolds leaned in with a flashlight, illuminating a small object pressed into the dead man's palm. A single brass casing. That's not from any weapon we've cataloged today, Reynolds said. Carter picked it up carefully, turning it over in the flashlight beam, and her breath caught audibly. What? Mercer said, stepping closer. This is a match to the rifle Cole used 3 years ago, Carter said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd recognize this caliber and this specific manufacturer mark anywhere. It's rare. It's not something you find by accident. He's telling you something, Mitchell said slowly. He's telling me he still has it. Carter said, her hands trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to control them. Cole's rifle, he kept it for 3 years. 12 hours after the shot back at the operations room, the brass casing sat on the table between them like a live grenade nobody wanted to touch. This changes things, Holt said. This isn't just a man hiding from justice anymore. This is someone who's been planning a very specific confrontation for a very long time, and he's using trophies from Cole's death as breadcrumbs to make sure you follow exactly the path he wants. Then we don't follow it, Mercer said. We find another way in. There isn't another way in, Carter said quietly. Not if we want to actually catch him instead of just reacting to whatever body he leaves next. So we play into his hands, Mitchell said, frustration evident in his voice. That's the plan. The plan is we get smarter about how we follow the trail, Carter said. He wants me isolated, alone, vulnerable. Every step of this has been designed to separate me from support and pull me somewhere private. So we make sure that never happens, Mitchell said firmly. Wherever this trail leads, you're not going alone. Carter looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. That's exactly what got Cole killed, she said quietly. Trusting the wrong person to have his back at the wrong moment. I'm not going anywhere, Mitchell said, his voice steady despite the weight of her words. Trust has to start somewhere, Carter. Might as well start with the guy who watched you make an impossible shot and decided he'd rather learn from you than compete with you. Something in Carter's expression softened just slightly. All right, she said. Partners. 12 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reynolds made a discovery that shifted the entire investigation. I ran the brass casing through a specialized ballistics database, he said, pulling up results on the main screen. It's not just rare, it's traceable. Only one manufacturer in the world produces this specific casing, and they keep meticulous distribution records for legal compliance reasons. Where did this batch ship? Carter asked. That's the interesting part, Reynolds said. 3 shipments total going back 4 years. 2 went to legitimate military contracts fully accounted for. The 3rd shipment, 12 months ago, went to a private buyer using a shell corporation registered in Nevada. Vain, Mercer said. Has to be, Reynolds confirmed. And here's where it gets more useful. The Shell Corporation has a registered physical address, an actual building, not just a P.O. box. Show me, Carter said, leaning forward. Reynolds pulled up a satellite image zooming in on an isolated compound roughly 90 miles from their current location, surrounded by empty desert in every direction. That's where he's hiding, Mitchell said. That's where he wants us to think he's hiding, Carter corrected carefully. Everything about this man has been misdirection wrapped around misdirection. We can't assume this is real just because it's convenient. Holt studied the image for a long moment. Convenient or not, it's the only solid lead we've got. I say we put eyes on it before we commit to anything. 13 hours after the shot, a surveillance drone lifted off from a temporary staging area outside the operations room, climbing into the dark desert sky toward the coordinates Reynolds had identified. Carter watched the live feed with an intensity that bordered on obsessive, her eyes tracking every shadow, every flicker of movement across the grainy infrared display. There, she said, suddenly pointing at a faint heat signature near the compound's rear entrance. Movement! Reynolds zoomed in immediately. The signature resolved into the shape of a single figure, standing motionless near a doorway, apparently watching the horizon. Is that him? Mitchell asked, his voice tight. I don't know, Carter admitted. But whoever it is, they're not hiding, they're waiting. Mercer's jaw tightened. Waiting for what? The figure on the screen suddenly moved, raising something toward the sky directly toward the drone's position. Get it out of there, Carter snapped. Now. Reynolds' hands flew across the controls, but he was a half-second too slow. The feed exploded into static. We lost the drone, Reynolds said, his voice shaking slightly. He shot it down. The room fell into stunned silence. He knew we were watching, Mitchell said slowly. He was waiting for us to send exactly that drone to that exact location at this exact time. Carter's hands curled into fists at her sides. He's not hiding from us. He's directing us. Every single move we make, he's already 3 steps ahead, waiting to see how we react. 13 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the secure phone in the operations room rang, and everyone froze at the unfamiliar tone. "That's not a line any one official should be calling," Reynolds said, staring at the display. "This number isn't registered to anything." Holt answered it cautiously, putting it on speaker. "This is Agent Holt." The voice that answered was calm, almost pleasant, instantly recognizable to everyone in that room. "Agent Holt, I do apologize for the drone. I don't enjoy destroying expensive equipment, but I needed to make a point." "Vain," Holt said flatly. "You can call me that if it makes the paperwork easier," the voice replied. "Though I imagine Evelyn already told you it's not entirely accurate." Carter stepped forward. "What do you want?" "Evelyn," Vane said, and there was something almost warm in the way he said her name, which made it infinitely more unsettling. "I was hoping you'd be listening. I want exactly what I've wanted for 3 years. A conversation. Just the two of us. No task force, no backup, no safety net." "Not happening," Mitchell said immediately. "Ah," Vane said. "The new partner. Sergeant Mitchell, I presume. Tell me, does he know what happened the last time Evelyn trusted someone to watch her back in the field?" Mitchell's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I'll make this simple," Vane continued. 48 hours from now, I'll send coordinates. Evelyn comes alone, or the next body that turns up won't be a stranger's. It'll be someone she actually cares about." The line went dead. 14 hours after the shot, the room erupted into overlapping voices. Everyone talking at once, the tension of the last several hours finally boiling over. "Absolutely not," Mercer said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We are not sending her in alone." "He's not giving us a real choice," Carter said quietly, and the calm in her voice was somehow more alarming than if she'd been panicking. "If I don't go, he starts killing people close to this investigation. If I do go, I walk into whatever trap he's spent 3 years perfecting." "Then we find a third option," Holt said. "We always find a third option." "Do we?" Carter said, turning to face him directly. "Because from where I'm standing, this man has been 10 steps ahead of every single decision we've made since that shot landed. He shot down a drone the exact moment we sent it. He killed a courier and left evidence specifically designed to lead us exactly where we are right now. Everything, every single thing has gone precisely according to his design. So we stopped playing his game," Mitchell said, echoing words Carter herself had spoken hours earlier. "You said it yourself back at the base. We stop reacting and start acting." Carter looked at him, something calculating, replacing the fear in her expression. "All right," she said slowly. "Then let's give him exactly what he's asking for, but not exactly how he expects it." 14 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Carter laid out a plan on the table. Her voice steady, her mind clearly working through every possible variable with the same patient precision that had made the impossible shot possible hours earlier. "He wants me alone," she said. "Fine, I go alone exactly as instructed. But nothing says the rest of you can't already be in position hours before I ever arrive using exactly the same environmental reading skills that made today's shot possible." "You want to read the terrain again, Theo?" Reynolds said, understanding dawning. "I want to turn his own trap into our advantage," Carter said. "He's confident because he thinks he understands exactly how I operate. He doesn't know that this time I'm not walking in blind." Mercer studied her carefully. "This is an enormous risk, Lieutenant Commander." "Every option is a risk, sir," Carter said. "I'd rather take the risk on my own terms than wait for him to dictate every single move." Mitchell stepped forward. "If you're doing this, I'm getting into position early. No arguments." Carter met his eyes, and after a long moment, she nodded once. "No arguments," she agreed. 15 hours after the shot, the coordinates arrived exactly as promised, transmitted through an encrypted channel that Reynolds spent nearly an hour trying and failing to trace. The location was a collapsed mining operation 40 miles into the most remote stretch of desert any of them had encountered yet, surrounded by jagged rock formations and abandoned equipment rusted by decades of exposure. Recon shows multiple elevated positions surrounding the central structure. Reynolds reported studying satellite imagery with grim focus. "If he's smart, and everything we've seen says he is, he'll have eyes on every possible approach." "Then we don't approach the way he expects," Carter said. 16 hours after the shot under cover of darkness, Mitchell and a small support team began the long, careful trek toward the mining site, moving with deliberate slowness across terrain designed to punish any mistake. Carter remained behind at the staging area, preparing herself for the confrontation ahead, running through every scenario, every possible outcome, her mind a battlefield of its own. Mercer found her there, checking her equipment with methodical precision. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do," Carter said, not looking up. "I've spent 3 years running from this exact moment, telling myself I wasn't ready, that I needed more time, more preparation, more understanding. But the truth is, there's no amount of preparation that erases the fact that I let Cole walk into that shot without questioning the intelligence packet closely enough." "That wasn't your fault," Mercer said. "I know that logically," Carter said. "But logic doesn't erase 3 years of waking up at 2 in the morning wondering if I could have caught it. If I'd been paying closer attention. If I'd trusted my instincts instead of trusting the data." Mercer was quiet for a moment. "Today you trusted your instincts over 13 shooters' data, and you saved this entire base." Carter finally looked up at him. "That's exactly why I have to finish this." 17 hours after the shot, Mitchell's voice crackled through Carter's earpiece, low and controlled. "In position," he murmured, "elevated point 600 meters from the central structure. I've got eyes on at least 2 potential hostile positions, but nothing confirmed yet." "Copy," Carter said, beginning her approach toward the mining site. Each step deliberate, her senses stretched wide open, reading the desert around her exactly the way she'd read it hours earlier before making the impossible shot. "Carter," Mitchell said quietly, "whatever happens in there, we've got your back, every step of the way." "I know," Carter said. "That's the only reason I'm walking in there with any confidence at all." 18 hours after the shot, Carter reached the entrance to the collapsed mining structure. The darkness inside absolute, broken only by a single dim light source flickering somewhere deep within. "I'm here," she called out, her voice steady despite the pounding of her own heart. "Just like you asked." For a long moment, silence answered her. Then from somewhere in the shadows, a voice she hadn't heard in 3 years, a voice that belonged to nightmares she'd never fully escaped, finally spoke. "Hello, Evelyn," Marcus Vane said. "I've been waiting a very long time for this." Carter's hand hovered near her sidearm, every instinct screaming at her to be ready for anything. "Then let's finish it," she said. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, unseen, unheard, a second figure shifted silently into position, watching, waiting, ready to reveal a truth far more devastating than anything Carter had prepared herself for. He was older than she remembered from the case files, grayer at the temples, but his eyes held the same calm, unhurried confidence that had haunted every version of him she'd built in her mind. "You look surprised," Vane said, tilting his head slightly. "Did you expect a monster? I'm just a man, Evelyn, a patient one. Patient enough to spend 3 years planning this." Carter said, her voice flat, controlled, though every muscle in her body was coiled tight. "Patience is the only thing that separates the professionals from the amateurs," Vane said. "You understand that better than most. It's why you waited today, isn't it? Why you let 13 men fail before you ever picked up that rifle. Don't compare what I did today to whatever this is." "But it's exactly the same," Vane said, taking a slow step closer, his hands visibly empty, deliberately non-threatening. "You read the environment. You understood the variables nobody else bothered to notice. I've done the same thing, Evelyn. For 3 years, I've read you." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then you should know I'm not walking out of here without answers." "I'm counting on it," Vane said, and something in his smile made the hair on the back of her neck rise. 18 hours and 20 minutes after the shot, Mitchell's voice whispered urgently through Carter's earpiece. "Movement," he said. "Second heat signature, west side of the structure, moving fast. This isn't just Vane in there." Carter kept her expression perfectly neutral, giving nothing away. "You brought company," she said aloud, watching Vane's reaction carefully. Vane's smile widened. "I told you to come alone. I never said I would extend you the same courtesy." "That wasn't the deal." "There was no deal," Vane said. "There was an invitation. And invitations, Evelyn, come with the host's rules, not the guests." From the shadows behind him, a second figure emerged, and Carter's breath caught in her throat. It was a woman roughly her own age, dressed in tactical gear, her face illuminated just enough by the dim light for Carter to make out sharp, familiar features. "You remember Agent Sarah Klein," Vane said conversationally. "From your old unit. She's been very helpful to me these past few years. Carter stared at the woman, memories crashing over her all at once, fast and disorienting. Sarah, she said slowly, you were part of Cole's support team. You were supposed to be watching his back. I was, Klein said, her voice cold, devoid of any apology. And then Marcus made me a better offer. 18 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the pieces finally clicked into place with sickening clarity. You, Carter said, her voice shaking now, not from fear, but from a fury 3 years in the making. You were the leak. You fed Cole's mission intelligence to Vane. You're the reason he's dead. I'm the reason you're standing here today, actually, Klein said, unmoved by the accusation. Marcus doesn't waste talent, Evelyn. He recognized what you were capable of long before you did. Cole was never the real objective. Don't, Carter said, her hands trembling with barely restrained rage. Don't you dare tell me his death was some kind of gift. It was a necessary sacrifice, Vane said calmly, stepping between the two women as though mediating a business dispute rather than confessing to murder. Cole was talented but rigid, set in his methods. You, Evelyn, you had potential he never possessed, the capacity to see beyond the data. I needed to know if that potential could be forged into something extraordinary under the right pressure. You killed him to test me, Carter said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. I killed him to create you, Vane said simply. And today, in that desert, you proved I was right to make that investment. 18 hours and 45 minutes after the shot, Mitchell's voice cracked through the earpiece again, tense with barely controlled alarm. Carter, I've got a third signature now moving toward your position from the north. This is escalating fast. Say the word and we move in. Not yet, Carter murmured under her breath, low enough that only her earpiece would catch it. I need him talking. Vane, either not hearing or not caring, continued, his voice taking on the particular enthusiasm of a man finally able to share a secret he'd been protecting for years. Do you understand what you accomplished today, Evelyn? An impossible shot in impossible conditions, succeeding where 13 trained specialists failed. That wasn't luck. That was 3 years of grief transformed into precision. I gave you that. Cole's death gave you that. You don't get to take credit for what I built out of surviving what you did to him, Carter said, her voice low and dangerous. Perhaps not, Vane conceded, but I recognized the raw material before anyone else did. That has to count for something. 19 hours after the shot, Klein shifted slightly, her hand drifting toward her sidearm, and Carter's entire body tensed in response. Careful, Carter said quietly. Or what, Klein said, a cold smile playing at her lips. You'll make another impossible shot. There's no rifle in your hands right now, Evelyn. Just you standing in the dark exactly where Marcus wanted you. That's where you're wrong, Carter said. And in that exact moment, a single shot rang out from somewhere high above the structure, striking the ground inches from Klein's feet, with pinpoint precision, close enough to send her stumbling backward in shock. That was a warning, Mitchell's voice said through the open comm channel, now no longer whispered, no longer hidden. The next one won't miss. Vane's calm expression flickered for the first time since Carter had arrived, genuine surprise breaking through his carefully constructed composure. You brought backup, he said slowly. You said I couldn't bring anyone into the room, Carter said, allowing herself the smallest, coldest smile. You never said anything about the mountains around it. 19 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, chaos erupted through the structure as Mercer's support team moved in from multiple directions, coordinated and precise exactly as they'd rehearsed hours earlier during the long trek across the desert. Klein scrambled for cover, drawing her weapon fully now, but a second precision shot from Mitchell's position shattered the rock beside her hand, forcing her to abandon the attempt entirely. Stand down! Mercer's voice boomed through a loudspeaker, somewhere outside, amplified and unmistakable. You are surrounded. There is no path out of this that doesn't end with you in custody. Vane remarkably remained still amid the sudden chaos, his eyes fixed entirely on Carter, something almost like admiration flickering across his face. You planned this, he said quietly, from the moment I gave you the coordinates. I told you, Carter said. I read the environment, just like today, just like every day since I lost Cole. You taught me to expect deception, Marcus. I simply learned the lesson better than you wanted me to. 19 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, with Klein restrained and the perimeter fully secured, Vane finally raised his hands, though the calm, unshaken confidence in his expression never fully disappeared. "This isn't over, you know," he said as Holt moved forward to place him in restraints. "You think capturing me ends this? Was never working alone, Evelyn. There are others, people far more patient than I am, watching everything that happens next." Carter stared at him, refusing to let the words rattle the composure she'd fought so hard to maintain. "Then we'll be ready for them too," she said. As Vane was led away into the darkness, escorted by armed agents toward a waiting transport, Carter remained standing amid the wreckage of the abandoned mining structure, the weight of 3 years finally beginning to lift from her shoulders, even as new unanswered questions settled heavily in its place. Mitchell appeared beside her moments later, his rifle slung, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Carter exhaled slowly, staring out at the vast, dark desert stretching endlessly around them. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but for the first time in 3 years, I think I might actually find out." 20 hours after the shot, the transport convoy carrying Marcus Vane rolled back toward the secure facility, and Carter sat in the vehicle directly behind it, unable to take her eyes off the taillights ahead, as though watching them might somehow guarantee he didn't disappear again the way he had 3 years ago. Mitchell sat across from her, watching her carefully. "You should try to rest," he said. "It's been a long day." "I'm not tired," Carter said, though the exhaustion etched into her face told a different story. "You're allowed to be tired," Mitchell said gently. "You just closed a 3-year-old wound tonight. That's not nothing." "It's not closed," Carter said quietly. "Not yet." He said he wasn't working alone. "Until I know exactly what that means, nothing about this is closed." Mitchell didn't push further. He'd learned enough about Carter in the last 20 hours to understand that some doors only opened when she was ready to open them herself. 20 hours and 30 minutes after the shot back at the secure facility, Holt escorted Vane into a heavily monitored interrogation room, the same one Carter had sat in hours earlier, though the atmosphere now carried an entirely different weight. Carter watched through the one-way glass, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her jaw set. "You don't have to be in here for this," Mercer said, standing beside her. "Yes, I do," Carter said. "I've waited 3 years to watch this conversation happen. I'm not missing it now." Inside the room, Holt took his seat across from Vane, sliding a folder onto the table between them. "Let's start simple," Holt said. "Who else is involved?" Vane smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair with the same unbothered composure he'd carried since the mining structure. "Agent Holt," he said, "you strike me as an intelligent man. Surely you understand that people like me don't survive by keeping detailed records of our associates." "Try anyway," Holt said. "I could give you a name," Vane said, "but it wouldn't be the right one. And even if it were, by the time you tracked it down, it would already be irrelevant. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." 21 hours after the shot, Reynolds burst into the observation room, breathless, his laptop clutched against his chest. "Sir Carter, you need to see this right now," he said. "I finally cracked the encryption on that radio frequency Vane used yesterday. There's a data trail buried underneath it, coordinates, financial transfers, and a name that's going to make this whole situation a lot more complicated." "Show me," Carter said immediately. Reynolds set the laptop down and pulled up a series of encrypted files, finally landing on a financial ledger, tracking payments across several shell accounts. "These payments," he said, pointing to a recurring transaction pattern, "go back almost 4 years. Regular, consistent, funneled through at least 6 different holding companies before reaching Vane's operation. Someone's been funding him this entire time." "Whose name is on the originating account?" Mercer asked. Reynolds hesitated, glancing at Carter with something like dread. "It traces back to a private security consultancy," he said slowly. "One that holds active government contracts, including, according to this, a contract with Naval Special Warfare Command." The room went silent. "That means," Mitchell said slowly, "someone inside the Navy's own contracting network has been funding the man who killed Cole and orchestrated everything that happened today." "That's what it looks like," Reynolds confirmed. 21 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Holt stepped out of the interrogation room, his expression grim, and found the team already waiting with the financial documents spread across the table. "He's not talking," Holt said. "Not about names, not about anything useful." "He might not have to," Mercer said, gesturing toward the screen. Reynolds found something. Holt studied the ledger carefully, his frown deepening with every line. "This consultancy," he said, "I know this name. They've done background vetting work for half a dozen sensitive programs over the last several years. If they're compromised, we're not looking at one bad actor anymore. We're looking at a hole in the entire vetting process for classified operations, which would explain how Vane knew about today's mission before Command even fully finalized it, Carter said quietly. If he had access to the vetting pipeline, he'd have visibility into operational planning long before deployment. Holt rubbed his temples, the weight of the implications settling heavily over him. This just went from a personal vendetta case to a national security problem. 22 hours after the shot, Carter insisted on going back into the interrogation room herself, and after a brief tense debate, Holt reluctantly agreed to let her sit in on the condition that he remain present the entire time. Vane's expression shifted subtly the moment she walked in, something almost pleased flickering behind his eyes. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "I wondered when you'd come back." "We found the money," Carter said, sliding a printed page across the table without preamble. "The consultancy funding your operation, the contract with Naval Special Warfare. You're not some rogue operator working alone in the desert, are you? You're a symptom. Someone bigger is pulling strings behind you." Something flickered behind Vane's calm expression there and gone so quickly, Carter almost missed it. "You always were faster than the others," he said quietly. "Cole took months to notice the inconsistencies in his mission briefings. You found the financial trail in less than a day. Who's above you, Marcus?" Vane studied her for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd walked into that abandoned mining structure, something like genuine hesitation crossed his features. "You're asking me to hand you someone who could end my life before this conversation is even finished," he said. "Do you understand what kind of purse funds an operation like mine? Someone who doesn't leave loose ends, Evelyn. And right now I'm the loosest end there is." "Then help us protect you," Carter said. "Give us a name and we can offer you protection." Vane laughed softly, a sound with no humor in it at all. "Protection from people who can erase a man's identity from every database in the country within hours of his death. You saw that yourself today, didn't you? My own face wasn't in a single system you had access to." 22 hours and 30 minutes after the shot back in the observation room, Mitchell watched the exchange with growing unease. "He's scared," he said. "Actually scared. That's not something I expected to see from him." "Which means whoever's above him is worse than anything we've dealt with so far," Mercer said grimly. Reynolds, still working at his terminal, suddenly stiffened. "Sir, I'm picking up unusual network activity. Someone's trying to access the secure server where we've been storing the case files from today." "From where?" Mercer demanded. "I can't tell yet," Reynolds said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "But whoever it is, they're good, really good. They're routing through at least 4 different proxy servers." "Can you stop them?" Carter asked, stepping out of the interrogation room the moment she heard the commotion. "I'm trying," Reynolds said, sweat beading on his forehead. "But if this is the same organization that's been funding Vane, they might already have access we don't even know about." 23 hours after the shot, the intrusion attempt intensified alarms, flashing silently across Reynolds' monitors as he fought to contain whatever was trying to breach the system. "They're after the ballistics data," he said suddenly, "the brass casing, the serial number trail, everything that connects Vane's funding to that consultancy." "They're trying to erase the evidence," Mitchell said. "Not just erase it," Reynolds said, his voice tight with growing panic. "Overwrite it. Replace it with something else entirely. If they succeed by morning, none of this will exist in any system, official or otherwise." "Cut the connection," Mercer ordered. "Physically if you have to." Reynolds' hands moved fast, disconnecting cables, isolating the terminal from the network entirely, the room falling into tense silence as the intrusion attempt abruptly stopped. "Did it work?" Carter asked. Reynolds exhaled, shakily checking the isolated system. "The core files are intact. But sir, whoever just tried that, they knew exactly what to look for. That's not random. That's someone with direct knowledge of our investigation." The implications hung heavy in the room. "Someone inside this facility," Mitchell said slowly, "or someone with access to information only a handful of people should have." 23 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Holt called an emergency meeting, his face pale, his voice uncharacteristically shaken. "I need everyone's phones," he said, "right now on the table." "Excuse me," Mercer said. "I'm not accusing anyone specifically," Holt said. But someone just attempted a sophisticated breach on evidence that only exists because of information shared exclusively among the people in this room, plus a handful of people at headquarters. Until I know how that happened, I need to eliminate every possible variable. One by one, the team placed their phones on the table. Carter watched carefully, studying each face, searching for any flicker of hesitation, any sign of guilt. She found none, though. Something in the pit of her stomach told her that didn't mean much. Vane had already taught her 3 years ago, and again tonight, that the most dangerous people rarely showed their hand until it was far too late to stop them. 24 hours after the shot, exactly one full day since Carter had made the impossible shot, Colonel Reyes arrived at the secure facility in person, her expression carrying the particular gravity of someone who understood exactly how large this situation had become. "Talk to me," she said, gathering the team in a private briefing room. Mercer laid out everything: the financial trail, the attempted breach, Vane's fear of whoever stood above him in the organization. Reyes listened without interrupting, her expression darkening with every detail. "This consultancy," she said finally, "I need every document you have on it, immediately." Colonel Maholt said carefully, "Given the breach attempt tonight, I'd recommend extreme caution about who else gets read into this. If there's a leak somewhere in the chain, expanding access could make things worse." "I understand the risk," Reyes said, "but I also understand that if this consultancy has been quietly embedding compromised assets into classified operational planning for years, this is no longer a matter this small task force can handle alone." Carter stepped forward. "With respect, Colonel, every time this investigation has expanded beyond a tight circle, something has gone wrong. Cole's mission was compromised because too many hands touched the intelligence packet. Today's operation was compromised the same way. I'd ask you to consider keeping this exactly as contained as it currently is, at least until we understand the full scope of who we're dealing with." Reyes studied Carter for a long moment, something respectful in her gaze. "I'll take that under advisement, Lieutenant Commander," but she said. "But understand, I can only protect this investigation's containment for so long before someone above my pay grade demands answers." 24 hours and 45 minutes after the shot back in the interrogation room, Vane's demeanor had shifted noticeably since Carter's earlier visit. The confidence remained, but something beneath it had grown quieter, more calculated. "You're still here," he observed as Carter entered again, this time alone, Holt watching from behind the glass per her insistence. "Someone tried to erase the evidence tonight," Carter said. "Tried to overwrite everything connecting your funding source to that consultancy, which tells me you're right to be scared, Marcus. But it also tells me they're panicking. And panicking people make mistakes." Vane's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of mistakes?" "The kind where they show us exactly how much power they actually have," Carter said, "which ironically tells us more about them than you ever could." Something in Vane's expression shifted calculation, replacing his earlier bravado. "You're smarter than I gave you credit for," he said quietly. "Perhaps smart enough to survive what's coming." "What's coming?" Carter pressed immediately. Vane hesitated, glancing toward the mirror, clearly aware Holt was listening on the other side. "There's a name," he said finally, his voice dropping low. "One name, I'll give it to you, Evelyn. Not because I trust you, because giving it to you is the only leverage I have left to keep myself alive long enough to see how this ends." Carter leaned forward. "I'm listening." 25 hours after the shot, Vane spoke a single word quiet enough that Carter had to lean in to catch it fully, and the moment it left his lips, something cold settled deep into her chest. "Hawthorne." Carter's breath caught. "That's impossible," she said slowly. "Director Hawthorne oversees half the classified operations in this region. He signed off on today's mission personally." "Exactly." Vane said, something almost sympathetic in his expression now. Who better to control an operation's outcome than the man responsible for approving it in the first place? 25 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, Carter burst out of the interrogation room, her composure finally cracking under the weight of what she'd just heard. "The Director Hawthorne," she said, finding Mercer and Holt waiting anxiously outside. "Vane just gave us Director Hawthorne." The color drained from Holt's face. "That's not possible. Hawthorne has 30 years of impeccable service. He's untouchable." "That's exactly what makes him the perfect person to hide behind," Carter said. "Nobody questions the man signing off on the missions. Nobody thinks to look at the person approving the operations for the operations themselves being compromised." Mercer's jaw tightened. If this is true, and it's a massive, if we're talking about someone with direct authority over nearly every classified mission running through this region, someone who could have buried this investigation with a single phone call the moment it started, then why hasn't he, Mitchell asked, stepping into the conversation. If Hawthorne's really behind this, why let the investigation get this far? Nobody had an answer. 25 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reynolds, still working furiously at his isolated terminal, suddenly went very still. "Guys," he said slowly, "I think I know why." "Talk," Carter said. "I've been cross-referencing Hawthorne's approval history for the last 18 months, Reynolds said. "Every single mission that's gone catastrophically wrong in this region during that time, everyone where intelligence turned out to be compromised, everyone where operators ended up in situations they shouldn't have, Hawthorne personally signed off on all of them." "That could just mean he's a bad commander," Mitchell said carefully. "It could," Reynolds agreed, "except there's a pattern in the failures. Every single compromised mission involved a specific type of target, high-value assets, specialists, people with unique skill sets that made them valuable beyond their immediate assignment." Carter felt something cold crawl up her spine. "Like coal." "Like coal," Reynolds confirmed. "And like you potentially if you'd been the one taking that first impossible shot 3 years ago instead of him." The room fell into stunned, horrified silence. "He's not just running a corrupt approval process," Carter said slowly, the pieces assembling themselves with sickening clarity. "He's identifying talent, specialists worth studying, worth testing, worth eventually recruiting or eliminating, depending on how they respond to pressure. That's exactly what Vane implied when he talked about creating me." Carter continued, her voice growing more urgent. "He said Cole's death gave him the raw material he needed. What if that wasn't Vane's operation at all? What if Vane's just the instrument, and Hawthorne is the one deciding who gets tested?" 26 hours after the shot, Colonel Reyes returned to the briefing room, and the moment she saw the collective expression on everyone's faces, she knew something significant had happened. "Tell me," she said simply. Mercer laid out everything: Vane's confession, Reynolds' pattern analysis, the horrifying implications of a director systematically identifying and testing high-value operators through manufactured crises. Reyes listened in silence, her face growing paler with every passing second. "If this is true," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're not looking at a rogue contractor and a corrupt funding source. We're looking at a systemic infiltration reaching into the highest levels of operational command." "That's what it looks like," Holt confirmed grimly. "Do you have proof?" Reyes asked. "Actual prosecutable proof, not just Vane's word and a pattern in mission failures." Everyone exchanged uncertain glances. "Not yet," Carter admitted. "Then we need it," Reyes said, her voice hardening with sudden resolve. "Fast, because the moment Hawthorne realizes this investigation has his name in it, he has more than enough authority to bury every single person in this room without anyone ever asking a single question." 26 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Carter found herself standing alone outside the secure facility, the desert night stretching endlessly around her, the weight of everything she'd learned in the last day all pressing down with almost physical force. Mitchell found her there several minutes later, his own expression heavy with the same exhaustion and disbelief that had settled over the entire team. "You okay?" he asked, though the question felt almost absurd given everything that had happened. "I don't know what okay even means right now," Carter admitted. 3 years I thought I understood what happened to Cole. A compromised mission, a corrupt contractor, simple if devastating. But this is something else entirely. "You didn't create this," Mitchell said. "None of this is on you." "I know that," Carter said. "But I also know that if Hawthorne's been testing specialists this entire time using manufactured crises to identify people worth recruiting or eliminating, then today's mission wasn't random either. 13 shooters failing wasn't bad luck. It was designed to bring me in." Mitchell absorbed that slowly. "You think Hawthorne orchestrated today's entire operation, not just approved it, orchestrated it?" "I think," Carter said quietly, staring out into the darkness, "that everything that's happened since that first failed shot has been exactly as carefully planned as everything Vane did 3 years ago. And I think we've only just started to understand how deep this actually goes." 27 hours after the shot back inside the facility, Reynolds made a discovery that sent a fresh wave of urgency through the entire team. "Sir," he said, his voice tight, Hawthorne just requested access to the case file, officially, through proper channels. He's citing his oversight authority. Mercer's face went rigid. Can you delay it? I can delay it for maybe an hour before it becomes suspicious that I'm delaying it, Reynolds said. After that, either I grant access or I create a paper trail showing I deliberately obstructed a director's authorized request. If he gets access to this file, Holt said slowly, he'll know exactly what we've uncovered. He'll know Vane talked, and a man with his authority has more than enough power to make every piece of evidence in this building disappear within hours. Then we move faster than he does, Carter said, her voice cutting through the mounting panic with sudden, sharp clarity. We don't wait for him to act. We act first. 27 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the team gathered around the table. One final time, the weight of the decision ahead settling heavily over every single person in the room. What exactly are you proposing? Reyes asked, studying Carter carefully. Vane already told us Hawthorne's name, Carter said. That's leverage Hawthorne doesn't know we have yet, at least not for certain. If we move now, before he accesses the file, before he understands exactly how much we know, we might have one narrow window to secure real evidence before he has the chance to erase it. What kind of evidence? Mercer asked. The financial trail, Carter said. Reynolds found the consultancy's payments to Vane. If Hawthorne's involved, there has to be a connection between him and that consultancy somewhere, a signature, an approval, something that ties him directly to the funding chain instead of just a pattern of coincidental mission failures. Reynolds was already typing. I can try to trace it, but if Hawthorne's smart enough to hide behind Vane and a shell company for this long, he's not going to leave an obvious paper trail connecting himself directly. Then we find the trail he thinks is hidden, Carter said, the same way I found the thermal pattern nobody else could see. Sometimes the answer isn't in the data everyone's already looking at. It's in what that data isn't showing you. 28 hours after the shot, Reynolds worked in near silence, the rest of the team watching anxiously as he cross-referenced financial records, personnel files, and mission approval histories, searching for the invisible thread connecting a decorated director to a hidden network of corruption 3 years in the making. Wait, he said suddenly, his eyes widening. Wait, I think I found something. What is it? Carter asked immediately. The consultancy's board of directors, Reynolds said, pulling up a corporate filing. 5 names, all carefully obscured behind holding structures. But one of them, filed 18 months ago in a routine annual disclosure, lists a home address that matches a property registered under Hawthorne's wife's maiden name. The room went utterly silent. That's it, Holt said, slowly, disbelief and vindication warring in his voice. That's the connection. That's the thread tying him directly to the funding source. Is it enough? Mercer asked. Enough to move on him officially without this getting buried the moment it reaches anyone with the authority to bury it. Reyes studied the document for a long moment, her expression hardening into something resolute. It's enough to start, she said. It's not everything, but it's enough to justify pulling in people above even Hawthorne's reach before he has any chance to realize what we found. 28 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, as Reyes moved to make the call that would set an entirely new chain of events into motion, Carter stood quietly near the window, watching the first faint hints of dawn beginning to break across the desert horizon. Mitchell joined her, his expression heavy with the exhaustion of a day that had stretched far longer than anyone could have anticipated. We're close, he said, aren't we? Close to actually finishing this. Carter watched the horizon in silence for a long moment before answering. 3 years ago, she said quietly, I thought closing this would feel like relief, like something finally settling. Right now, it just feels like we barely scratched the surface of something much bigger than any of us understood. Maybe that's okay, Mitchell said. Maybe finishing something this big was never going to feel simple. Carter turned to look at him, something unreadable behind her tired eyes. He's not going to go down quietly, she said. Hawthorne, a man with his authority, his connections, his years of carefully constructed reputation. The moment he realizes we're closing in, he's going to fight back with everything he has. Then we'll be ready, Mitchell said firmly. Carter's gaze drifted back toward the horizon, toward the vast desert that had already claimed so much, that had tested her in ways she never could have imagined 28 hours earlier, when she'd stepped forward in that command tent and quietly said the 4 words that had started everything. I hope you're right, she said softly, because something tells me the hardest part of this fight hasn't even started yet. Behind them, Reyes's voice carried through the room. Sharp, urgent, unmistakable as she relayed the discovery to someone far above their pay grade, setting into motion a confrontation that would test not just Carter's skill, but the loyalty, courage, and resolve of everyone who had chosen to stand beside her since the moment the impossible shot had first echoed across that burning desert. 29 hours after the shot, the secure phone in Reyes's hand rang before she could even finish dialing, and the caller ID made every person in that room go rigid with tension. "That's Hawthorne's office line," Reynolds said, staring at the display in disbelief. "He's calling us." "Nobody outside this room knew we found that connection," Mercer said slowly, his voice tight with sudden alarm. "How does he already know to call?" Reyes stared at the phone for a long moment, her jaw set before finally answering, putting it on speaker for the room to hear. "This is Colonel Reyes." Colonel Hawthorne's voice came through smooth, measured, carrying the particular authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I understand you've been running quite the operation out of that facility. Care to explain why a routine mission report from yesterday has generated this much unusual activity on secure networks I personally oversee?" Carter felt her pulse spike, her eyes locking with Mercer's across the room. "With respect," Director Reyes said carefully, "I'm not required to explain ongoing investigative activity to someone whose name has surfaced within that investigation." Silence stretched on the other end of the line, just long enough to feel deliberate. "I see," Hawthorne said, finally, his tone shifting, the warmth draining out of it entirely. "Then I suppose we understand each other, Colonel. I'd advise caution. Investigations built on the word of a captured criminal rarely hold up well under scrutiny, especially when that criminal has every incentive to name whoever might save his own life." The line went dead. 29 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, the room erupted into urgent motion. "He knows," Mitchell said. "He knows exactly what we found." "Someone tipped him off," Holt said grimly. "The breach attempt last night. It wasn't just about erasing evidence. It was reconnaissance. They already knew what we were looking at before we even confirmed the connection ourselves." Reynolds' hands flew across his keyboard, panic rising in his voice. "Sir, I'm seeing new access requests hitting the system right now. Multiple attempts, all under Hawthorne's authorization credentials. He's trying to pull every file connected to this investigation." "Lock him out," Mercer ordered. "I can't lock out a director," Reynolds said desperately. "His clearance supersedes mine by 3 levels. If he wants this file, he can take it, and there's nothing in this building that can stop him." Carter stepped forward, her voice cutting through the rising panic with sudden, sharp clarity. "Then we stop thinking about this building and start thinking bigger." 29 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Carter laid out the beginnings of a plan, her mind working through the same patient, methodical process that had guided her through the impossible shot nearly 30 hours earlier. "Hawthorne has authority over this network," she said, "over this facility, over everyone in this room technically, but authority isn't the same as control over everything. There are people above him too. The problem," Reyes said, "is that a man in his position has spent decades building relationships with exactly those people. If we go over his head with unverified accusations, there's a very real chance he simply makes a few phone calls, and this entire investigation gets quietly reassigned to someone loyal to him instead." "Then we don't go to people," Mitchell said suddenly. "We go to something that can't be bought or reassigned." Everyone turned to look at him. "The press," he continued, "if this breaks publicly in a way that can't be quietly buried, Hawthorne loses the ability to control the narrative through internal channels." "That's an enormous risk," Holt said. "If we go public with unverified accusations against a sitting director, and we're wrong, or even if we're right but can't prove it fast enough, we destroy this investigation and potentially our own careers in the process. We're running out of options that don't carry risk," Carter said quietly. "He's already moving to erase evidence. He's already called us directly, which means he's confident enough in his position to threaten a colonel over an open line. Every hour we wait is an hour he uses to protect himself." 30 hours after the shot, Reynolds made a discovery that changed the entire calculation. "Wait," he said suddenly, staring at his screen with wide eyes. "Wait, I don't think we need to go public. I think I found something better." "Talk," Mercer said immediately. "The access requests Hawthorne's been making," Reynolds said, his fingers still moving rapidly. "Every single one of them is being logged automatically on a redundant backup server that exists specifically for auditing director-level access. It's a security failsafe most people don't even know exists buried in a system upgrade from 2 years ago. You're saying he doesn't know we can see what he's accessing, Carter said slowly, understanding dawning. I'm saying every attempt he's made to erase evidence tonight has been quietly recorded on a server. He has no idea exists, Reynolds confirmed. If he's trying to delete files connected to Vane's funding, connected to the consultancy, connected to his own name, that action alone becomes evidence of consciousness of guilt. Mercer's eyes lit up with something close to hope for the first time in hours. He's incriminating himself in real time. Exactly, Reynolds said. The more he tries to cover this up, the more evidence he leaves behind on a system he doesn't know is watching. 30 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reyes moved quickly, contacting a small, carefully selected circle of officials whose loyalty and discretion she trusted. Absolutely people positioned high enough in the chain of command to act without needing Hawthorne's approval, but insulated enough from his network of influence to remain untouched by whatever leverage he might try to use. We have maybe 6 hours, she said, addressing the exhausted team gathered around the table, before Hawthorne either successfully erases enough evidence to protect himself or realizes we're building a case against him using his own actions as proof. 6 hours isn't much time, Holt said. It's what we've got, Reyes said firmly, so we use it well. Carter, who had been quiet for several minutes, finally spoke up, her voice carrying a new sharpened resolve. There's something else we need, she said. Vane, he's the only person who can directly confirm the connection between Hawthorne and the funding operation. If Hawthorne realizes his own network access is being logged, his next move will be to eliminate the one witness who can speak against him directly. The room went cold with the realization. Vane's in protective custody, Holt said. Secure facility monitored around the clock. Hawthorne has a director-level authority over exactly this kind of facility, Carter said. If he wants Vane silenced, he doesn't need to sneak in with a weapon. He just needs to make one phone call rerouting custody, and Vane simply disappears into a system that answers to him. 31 hours after the shot, Holt's phone buzzed with an urgent notification and his face went pale as he read it. Custody transfer request, he said, his voice tight. Just came through, authorized under Hawthorne's credentials. They're moving Vane to a different facility, effective immediately. That's not happening, Carter said, already moving toward the door. Carter, wait, Mercer called after her. If you interfere with an authorized transfer, you're directly disobeying a director's order. That's not a small thing. Neither is letting the only witness against him vanish into a black hole. Carter said, not slowing down. I've already lost one person to this man's network. I'm not losing the one piece of leverage that finally gives us a chance to end it. Mitchell was already moving to follow her. I'm coming with you. Both of you wait, Reyes said, her voice cutting through the urgency with sudden authority. If you're doing this, you do it my way. I'll authorize an emergency hold citing active witness tampering concerns. It buys us time and it keeps this technically within proper channels instead of you two running off half-cocked. 31 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, Reyes's emergency hold order reached the detention wing just minutes before the transfer team arrived, creating a tense standoff between two sets of armed personnel, each citing conflicting authorization from different levels of command. Carter arrived in the middle of it, her heart pounding as she took in the scene. Two groups of soldiers facing off, hands hovering near weapons, nobody quite willing to be the one who escalated first. Stand down, she said loudly, stepping between the two groups with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Everyone, this doesn't need to become a situation. The transfer team leader, a stern-faced officer Carter didn't recognize, turned toward her with obvious irritation. This is an authorized director-level transfer, Lieutenant Commander. I suggest you and your colonel step back before this becomes a serious problem for both of you. Show me the authorization, Carter said. The officer produced a document, and Carter scanned it quickly, her stomach tightening as she confirmed exactly what she'd feared. Hawthorne's signature, clean and official, ordering Vane's immediate transfer to a facility Carter had never heard of. This facility doesn't exist in any standard directory, she said slowly. I've spent enough time around classified operations to know what a legitimate transfer looks like. This isn't it. That's not your call to make, the officer said. No, Reyes said, arriving just in time, her voice carrying the particular weight of someone with the authority to actually back up her words. But it is mine. This transfer is suspended effective immediately pending review of witness tampering concerns in an active federal investigation. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with my office. 31 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the standoff finally broke, the transfer team reluctantly withdrawing under Reyes's direct order, though the tension in the air remained thick enough to choke on. Carter exhaled slowly, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly draining out of her. That was close, Mitchell said quietly, appearing at her side. Too close, Carter agreed. He's moving fast. Faster than I expected. Which means he's scared, Mitchell said. Scared people make mistakes. Or scared people become dangerous in ways that are hard to predict, Carter countered. 32 hours after the shot, back in the interrogation room, Vane looked visibly shaken for the first time since Carter had first encountered him at the mining structure. They tried to move me, he said before Carter had even fully entered the room. I heard them talking outside. A transfer order. We stopped it, Carter said. Something in Vane's expression shifted, gratitude mixing uneasily with fear. You understand what that means, don't you? He's decided I'm more valuable dead than alive. That's not a decision men like Hawthorne make lightly. It means he genuinely believes I could destroy him. Then help us make sure you do, Carter said. On the record, formally. Not whispered confessions in a dark interrogation room that could be dismissed as coercion. I need you to testify. Vane was quiet for a long moment. His usual composure finally completely cracked. If I testify, he said slowly, I become a permanent target, not just from Hawthorne, from everyone in his network who benefits from this staying buried. You're already a target, Carter said. The transfer order proves that. The only difference now is whether you die as a loose end or you die, if it comes to that, having actually done something that matters. 32 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Vane finally nodded, something resolute settling over his features for the first time since Carter had met him. All right, he said quietly. I'll testify. Everything. The funding, the consultancy, Hawthorne's involvement, the pattern of manufactured missions designed to identify and test specialists. All of it. Relief flooded through Carter, quickly tempered by the enormity of what still lay ahead. There's one more thing, Vane said as Carter turned to leave. Something I haven't told you yet. Carter paused. What? Cole's mission, Vane said quietly. The one that killed him. Hawthorne didn't just approve it. He selected the target location personally, overriding the original mission parameters 2 days before deployment, citing updated intelligence that, as far as I know, never actually existed. Carter's breath caught old grief and fresh fury colliding violently in her chest. He killed him, she said slowly. Directly, not through negligence, through deliberate action. I believe so, Vane said. I was never given the full picture, Evelyn. I was a contractor, not a co-conspirator in his inner circle. But everything I've pieced together over the last 3 years points to exactly that conclusion. 33 hours after the shot, Carter walked out of that interrogation room, carrying a weight that felt heavier than anything she'd carried in the last 3 years combined, and Mitchell, watching her face, immediately understood something significant had happened. What did he say? Mitchell asked carefully. Carter told him, her voice flat, controlled the particular kind of calm that came from grief too large to process in the moment. Mitchell was quiet for a long time after she finished. I'm sorry, he said finally. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I know, Carter said softly. For 3 years, I told myself Cole's death was the result of a broken system. Bad luck compounded by incompetence and corruption. But it wasn't luck at all. Someone with enormous power looked at the mission parameters and made a choice specifically, deliberately, to put him in a position he couldn't survive. Why, Mitchell asked. Why him specifically? Because Hawthorne needed to know what happened next. Carter said, the horrifying clarity of it settling over her fully now. He needed to know how someone close to Cole, someone talented, would respond to that kind of loss. He needed to know if grief could be shaped into something he could use. You, Mitchell said quietly. Me, Carter confirmed. 33 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reyes gathered the entire team for what she made clear would be their final strategy session before moving forward with a formal public confrontation. Vane's agreed to testify, she said. Reynolds has the audit trail showing Hawthorne's attempts to erase evidence. We have a financial connection tying him to the consultancy. What we don't have yet is definitive proof connecting him directly to the manipulation of Cole's mission 3 years ago. I might have something, Reynolds said, raising a hand cautiously. I've been digging through old mission archives since Carter mentioned the override. There's a record buried deep showing the original mission parameters for Cole's operation before the location change Vane mentioned. If I can pull the metadata showing exactly who authorized that change and when we'd have direct documentary proof. How long? Carter asked. An hour, Reynolds said. Maybe less if the archive isn't corrupted. Then we have an hour, Reyes said. After that, I'm taking everything we have to people who can act on it immediately, complete evidence trail or not. 34 hours after the shot, as Reynolds worked feverishly to pull the archived mission records, Carter stood alone once more outside the facility, staring up at a sky slowly brightening with the first true light of morning. Mercer found her there, his own exhaustion evident in the deep lines etched across his face. You've been carrying this alone for 3 years, he said quietly, joining her. I can't imagine what today's cost you having to relive all of it while also fighting to survive it. I didn't expect any of this, Carter admitted. I thought I was walking into a routine mission. Make an impossible shot, save some lives, go home. I never imagined it would tear open every wound I'd spent 3 years trying to close. For what it's worth, Mercer said. I don't think those wounds were ever actually closed. I think you just learned to function around them. Carter considered that for a long moment. Maybe that's true. Whatever happens next, Mercer continued, whatever Hawthorne throws at us, whatever it costs to bring this into the light, I want you to know this entire base. Everyone who watched you make that shot yesterday, we're standing with you, all the way through. 34 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, Reynolds' voice suddenly rang out from inside the facility, sharp with urgency. I found it, he called. I found the metadata. Carter and Mercer rushed back inside, gathering with the rest of the team around Reynolds' screen. The original mission plan, Reynolds said, pulling up the archived document, had Cole's team approaching from the northern ridge using a well-established, thoroughly vetted route. 2 days before deployment, an override request came through redirecting the entire operation to a southern approach, instead citing new intelligence about enemy troop movement. And the southern approach, Carter said quietly, already knowing the answer, was exactly where the thermal conditions turned out to be unpredictable enough to make the shot impossible. Exactly, Reynolds confirmed, and here's the signature authorizing that override. He zoomed in on the document, and there, unmistakable, was Hawthorne's digital signature, timestamp dated undeniable. The room fell into heavy, vindicated silence. We have him, Holt said softly, disbelief and grim satisfaction mixing in his voice. We actually have him. 35 hours after the shot, Reyes moved immediately, contacting her carefully selected circle of trusted officials, laying out the complete evidence trail in a secure briefing that would set the wheels of formal action into motion. Carter listened from the next room, unable to fully process the reality that after 3 years of grief, guilt, and unanswered questions, the truth had finally undeniably surfaced. It's really happening, Mitchell said quietly, standing beside her. He's actually going down for this. I want to feel relieved, Carter admitted. I keep waiting for it to hit me, but right now all I feel is exhausted. That's allowed, Mitchell said gently. You've been fighting this battle alone for 3 years. You're allowed to feel exhausted now that you're finally not fighting it by yourself anymore. 35 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the secure phone rang again, and this time everyone in the room recognized the caller ID immediately. Hawthorne. Reyes answered, her voice steady despite the enormity of what she now knew. This is Colonel Reyes. I understand my transfer authorization was blocked. Hawthorne said, his voice tighter now, less composed than it had been hours earlier. And I understand certain archived files have been accessed that shouldn't concern this investigation at all. They concern this investigation a great deal, Director Reyes said. I have a signed override authorization connecting you directly to the manipulation of a mission that resulted in an operator's death 3 years ago. I have financial records connecting you to a consultancy funding a man who murdered that operator and orchestrated an elaborate operation targeting his surviving partner. I'd say that concerns this investigation quite a bit. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long and heavy. You don't understand what you're doing, Hawthorne said, finally, his voice dropping into something cold and dangerous. You don't understand the forces you're about to unleash. Then explain it to me, Reyes said calmly. Right now, on this call. Another long silence. I built something, Hawthorne said, finally, his composure fracturing in real time. A system for identifying true excellence under pressure that this country desperately needs. Cole was talented but ordinary. Evelyn Carter is something else entirely. Something I recognized long before any of you did. You murdered a man to test his partner's grief, Carter said, stepping forward and taking the phone from Reyes's hand before anyone could stop her. There's no system that justifies that, Director. There's no mission important enough to justify what you did to Cole or what you tried to do to me. Evelyn, Hawthorne said, and something in his voice shifted, almost gentle, almost proud. You have no idea what you're capable of, what today proved. 13 specialists failed, and you succeeded not through luck, but through exactly the kind of understanding I always knew grief could forge in someone with your potential. You don't get to take credit for what I built out of surviving what you did, Carter said, echoing words she'd spoken to Vane hours earlier, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. You don't get to call this excellence. This is murder, this is manipulation, and it ends now. 36 hours after the shot, the line went dead and the room fell into stunned, heavy silence. He's not going to go quietly, Mercer said finally. Not after that conversation. No, Reyes agreed grimly. He's not. Reynolds, still monitoring the audit trail on his isolated terminal, suddenly stiffened. Sir, I'm seeing unusual movement in the system. Hawthorne's pulling emergency authorization codes. He's trying to activate something. Activate what? Holt demanded. I don't know, Reynolds said, his voice tight with fear. But whatever it is, it requires director-level clearance, and he's using every remaining credential he has to push it through before someone stops him. 36 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, an alarm began blaring through the facility, red lights flashing across every hallway, and Carter felt her stomach drop as she recognized the particular urgency of a lockdown protocol. What's happening? She demanded, sprinting toward the operations room. Hawthorne just authorized an emergency security lockdown. Reynolds said, his hands shaking as he tried to regain control of the system, citing a supposed security breach. He's using it to seal every exit in this facility. He's trying to trap us here, Mitchell said, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity, while he sends someone to make sure none of us walk out to testify against him. 36 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the facility's automated defense systems activated, sealing every door with the cold mechanical finality of a trap. Closing shut, Carter's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening every thought into crystal clarity, the same focus that had guided her through the impossible shot, now turning toward an entirely different kind of battlefield. Reynolds, she said urgently, can you override the lockdown? I'm trying, Reynolds said, sweat pouring down his face as his fingers flew across the keyboard. But his clearances is fighting mine at every turn. It's like trying to win a tug-of-war against someone with 3 times my strength. Then we don't fight him on his terms, Carter said, an idea sparking rapidly to life. The audit server, the one logging his access attempts. If he's using emergency credentials right now, that's still being recorded, isn't it? Reynolds' eyes widened. Yes, every single command he's issuing is being logged in real time. Then broadcast it, Carter said. Not just to Reyes' trusted circle, send it everywhere. Every official who might have a stake in stopping a corrupt director from trapping federal witnesses inside a locked facility. If he's going to use his authority to trap us, let's make sure the whole system watches him do it. 37 hours after the shot, Reynolds worked with desperate speed, compiling the real-time audit log into an emergency broadcast package, his hands moving faster than Carter had ever seen them move. Sending now, he said, his voice tight with tension. If this reaches the right people fast enough, it might force an intervention before Hawthorne can finish whatever he's planning. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity. The entire team gathered around the terminal, watching the transmission status bar crawl slowly toward completion. Come on, Mitchell muttered. Come on. 37 hours and 15 minutes after the shot, the transmission completed, and almost immediately the secure phone began ringing, one call after another, officials from across the chain of command suddenly demanding answers about the unusual lockdown and the director issuing it. It's working, Holt said, relief flooding his voice as he fielded call after call. People are asking questions, real questions, from people with the authority to demand real answers. 37 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the facility's lockdown systems suddenly disengaged, the red alarm lights fading back to the normal steady glow of routine operation. Someone just overrode Hawthorne's authorization, Reynolds said, staring at his screen in stunned relief. From above, way above. The doors unsealed with a soft mechanical hiss, and the entire team exhaled as one, the crushing tension of the last 20 minutes finally beginning to release its grip. 38 hours after the shot, Reyes received a call that ended the entire ordeal with a finality none of them had quite dared to hope for. She listened in silence for several long minutes, her expression shifting slowly from tense uncertainty to something approaching genuine relief. "Understood," she said finally. "Thank you." She lowered the phone and turned to face the exhausted waiting team. "They picked him up 20 minutes ago," she said. "Director Hawthorne, at his residence. He didn't resist." The room erupted into quiet, exhausted relief. Nobody quite having the energy left for a louder celebration after everything the last 38 hours had demanded of them. Carter simply closed her eyes, letting the weight of 3 years finally truly begin to lift from her shoulders. 38 hours and 30 minutes after the shot, the team gathered outside the facility as the first full light of morning spread across the desert horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pale blue. The harsh violence of the previous day finally giving way to something calmer, something that almost resembled peace. Mitchell found Carter standing apart from the others, watching the sunrise in silence. "You did it," he said quietly, joining her. "We did it," Carter corrected. "All of us. I couldn't have gotten anywhere close to this alone." "Maybe not," Mitchell agreed, "but it started with you, with 4 words in a tent full of people who'd already given up." Carter allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Let me handle it." "Best decision anyone made in that entire operation," Mitchell said. 39 hours after the shot, Mercer approached the two of them, his own exhaustion softened by something like quiet pride. "Command's already reaching out," he said. "Word of what happened here, the full story, not just the shot, but everything that came after it's spreading fast. People are going to want to know how a single Navy SEAL uncovered a corruption network reaching into the highest levels of operational command." "I didn't do it for recognition," Carter said. "I know that," Mercer said. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Carter looked out at the brightening horizon, thinking of Cole, of the 3 years she'd spent believing his death was simply the tragic result of a broken system of the truth that had finally painfully surfaced after everything the last day and a half had demanded of her. "He'd be proud," Mitchell said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. "Cole, of everything you just did." "I hope so," Carter said softly. "I really hope so." 40 hours after the shot, as the sun climbed fully above the horizon, bathing the desert in warm morning light, Carter finally allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in 3 long years. Peace, not the absence of grief. Grief she understood now would likely stay with her for the rest of her life, woven permanently into the fabric of who she'd become. But something had shifted, something fundamental. The crushing weight of unanswered questions finally completely lifted. Cole's death had not been random. It had not been meaningless. And the man responsible, along with the corrupt system he'd built to justify, it had finally been brought into the light, exposed, ended. The desert that had once seemed like her enemy, the vast, unpredictable expanse that had taken Cole and nearly claimed dozens of others, now felt different beneath the golden morning light. Not hostile, not indifferent, simply vast, patient, waiting to be understood by anyone willing to look closely enough to see what others missed. Carter understood now what she hadn't fully grasped in the immediate aftermath of that impossible shot. The lesson had never really been about wind or thermals or the invisible currents bending bullets off course. The lesson had always been about patience, about preparation, about the courage to keep looking when everyone else had already given up. 13 elite snipers had failed that day, not because they lacked skill, but because they had been solving the wrong problem entirely. And in the desert stillness, with the sun finally rising over a battle 3 years in the making, Lieutenant Commander Evelyn Carter, the operator they would come to call Silent Echo, stood as living proof of a truth that would echo through every story told about that day for years to come. The greatest victories rarely belong to the loudest voice in the room. They belong to the ones who wait, who watch, who understand what everyone else has overlooked. They belong to the quiet strength that says nothing until the exact moment it matters most, and then simply, calmly, unshakably steps forward and says 4 words that change everything. "Let me handle it." And on that morning, as the truth finally stood fully in the light, as justice finally caught up to 3 years of grief and betrayal, that quiet strength had done exactly what it promised. It had handled it completely.